C51 Hey, don't bother. The next second, Mia's fingers, sharp as blades, plunged into the artery in her opponent's neck. Emily's face froze in an expression of sheer terror. Her mouth opened as if to say something, but all that came out was a gush of blood. Another body collapsed at Mia's feet. What happens if it hits 100%? A deep, magnetic voice suddenly spoke near her ear. She turned her head and saw Ethan's handsome face. Ethan had already noticed the peculiar detail on her wrist and couldn't help but ask, his curiosity piqued. Mia smiled faintly. I'd probably die. The bracelet she wore was a custom device created by researchers. It was linked to her pain receptors, monitoring the maximum level of pain her body could endure. If it ever reached 100%, it would unlock Mia's strongest state, but it would also mean the end of her life. Meanwhile, Sean was locked in combat with an awakener who had condensed a crystal core. His opponent was a brute with enhanced strength, wielding a massive alloy battle axe that weighed several tons, yet he swung it as if it were weightless. The axe whistled through the air, aiming straight for Sean with devastating force. Damn it. Mia's already paid her debt to Ethan. Guess it's my turn. Sean's sharp eyes darted around, calculating his next move. Suddenly, his body crackled with energy. His previously lean frame bulked up, muscles swelling as his physique became noticeably more powerful. This was Sean's awakener ability, Fearless Berserk. While it drastically reduced his intelligence, it massively boosted all his physical attributes. Sean's once sharp and calculating expression now bordered on vacant, almost dumb. But as the giant axe came hurtling toward him, he didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his fist to meet it head on. Clang! The sound of metal reverberated through the air. The axe's handle bent under the impact, warping out of shape. Even the strength-enhanced awakener wielding it couldn't withstand the shock. His hands split open at the seams, blood dripping from his palms. The pain forced him to release the weapon, and the axe went flying. What the? The man's face twisted in disbelief. He hadn't expected Sean to be this strong. Before he could recover, Sean was already in front of him. With a single, devastating punch to the chest, the sound of bones shattering echoed in the air. The man's entire skeleton seemed to collapse inward, his body contorting grotesquely as he was sent flying like a broken rag doll. Got him, Sean said, clenching his fist triumphantly. The small fry from the Blackhand Legion were no match for Mia and her team. The two sides weren't even in the same league. After all, Mia and her group were awakeners from Refuge number 001, the strongest of their kind. Even Chris and the other 3 team members worked seamlessly together. Armed with alloy blades, they formed a tactical formation and engaged several awakeners who had condensed neurocores. It didn't take long before they took down 2 of them. God damn it. They're this strong. Gideon, who had been sent flying earlier, struggled to sit up from the pile of rubble he'd landed in. He looked around and realized 2 of his strongest fighters had already been killed. What made it worse was Mia. She wasn't even fully engaged in the fight. She was casually chatting with Ethan, the 2 of them laughing and talking like they were catching up over coffee. It was clear they didn't see him as a threat at all. A wave of panic washed over Gideon. It felt like a steel spike was pressing against his forehead, a constant reminder that death was looming over him. The thought of escape crept into his mind. But he knew there was no way he could outrun Mia. Then, he remembered, there were still 3 of his men upstairs, guarding the hostages from the refuge. That's my last card to play. With that, Gideon leapt to the 2nd floor in a single bound. Back on the 1st floor, Gideon's remaining men were already struggling to hold their ground. When they saw their leader abandon them, despair set in. A single thought echoed in their minds. Son of a bitch. Moments later, Chris and the others cut them down one by one. The battle on the 1st floor was over. Ethan hadn't lifted a finger. After all, these were just small fry, not worth his effort. He was content to watch from the sidelines. Here, take these. Sean walked over, holding a crystal core and several neurocores, and handed them to Ethan. At Nobleman at. Ethan glanced at him. Isn't this a bit much? Nope. The dean used to tell us when we were kids, a small act of kindness can change someone's life. You gave me bread when I was starving, so I owe you big time. Sean said with conviction, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan didn't argue further and accepted the crystal core and neurocores. Upstairs, in the 2nd floor lobby. What was once a bustling karaoke bar was now eerily empty. The air was thick with tension. In the center of the room, 3 people knelt on the floor, trembling. They were bound with iron chains, muffled cries escaping from behind the tape covering their mouths. Gideon ripped the tape off their mouths, intending to use their pleas for help as leverage. Maybe, just maybe, if Mia had a soft spot, she'd let him go. It wasn't long before Ethan and the others arrived. Mia, please save me. I don't want to die. Please. One of the hostages wailed, tears streaming down his face. Stay back. Don't come any closer, or I'll kill them right now. Gideon barked, his voice sharp and desperate. Huh. Mia tilted her head, her gaze shifting to the hostages. The three captives were trembling uncontrollably, their cries for help growing louder. They were utterly terrified, on the verge of breaking down. Ethan, as usual, stayed back, watching the scene unfold with mild curiosity. He wanted to see how Mia would handle this situation. Mia, hearing Gideon's threat, actually stopped in her tracks. She didn't move forward but instead stood still, her expression thoughtful as if she were calculating something. Saving one awakener and bringing them back to the refuge would get me 2 cans of meat. But killing Gideon would earn me a crystal core. No matter how I look at it, killing him is the better deal. Gideon noticed Mia's hesitation and assumed his threat had worked. A smug grin spread across his face. People from the refuge, he thought, were so bound by their rules and regulations. They were used to being controlled, and it made them predictable. Pathetic. Really. Hey, your superiors must have ordered you to save people, right? Gideon sneered. Yeah, Mia replied with a small nod, not bothering to deny it. Gideon's grin widened. Good. Then let us go, and I'll let you take these 3 with you. That won't be necessary, Mia said, her voice calm. Because I don't follow orders. Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. What? Gideon froze, his smugness evaporating in an instant. He realized what she meant. Even the 3 hostages looked stunned, their faces blank with confusion. For a moment, they thought they were saved. But now, their hopes plummeted, crashing into despair. Before anyone could react, Mia made her move. In a flash, her figure blurred as she darted forward with lightning speed. Gideon clenched his jaw, his body tensing under the immense pressure. But desperation fueled his resolve, and he roared with fury. Brothers, fight to the death. He spat the words through gritted teeth, slashing his hand down in a decisive motion. His blade sliced toward the hostages. If he was going to die, he'd take a few with him. Yeah, fight to the death. His 3 subordinates echoed, their voices filled with defiance. They were all awakeners who had condensed crystal cores, and their combined strength was nothing to scoff at. Boom. The fight erupted in an instant. Mia clashed with Gideon head-on, their fists colliding with a deafening impact. The sheer force sent Gideon flying, smashing through 2 walls of private karaoke rooms before he finally came to a stop. But Gideon's metallic skin absorbed most of the damage. He crawled out of the rubble, relatively unscathed, and charged at Mia again. Meanwhile, Sean was locked in combat with Gideon's 3 subordinates. The trio worked together seamlessly, using their agility and coordination to keep Sean occupied. For now, they managed to hold their ground, preventing him from gaining the upper hand. The entire lobby descended into chaos. Tiles shattered, walls crumbled, and waves of energy rippled through the air. Chris and the other 3 team members stayed back, standing behind Ethan. This was a battle between awakeners who had condensed crystal cores. At their neurocore stage, they weren't qualified to join in. Among all the chaos, the fight between Mia and Gideon was the most intense. No matter how many times Mia sent Gideon flying, he always got back up, like an indestructible cockroach. His defensive abilities were formidable, and Mia's strength, which relied on her pain threshold, wasn't enough to break through his defenses. For now, she couldn't deal any significant damage. TCH. If that's the case, I'll have to use the old method, Mia muttered, her eyes narrowing. There were plenty of ways to increase her pain threshold. The simplest, self-harm. Back when she was in the psychiatric hospital, she'd done it countless times. Just as she was about to act, a voice called out from behind her. Hey, don't bother. C-52 actual kills, 16. Mia was undeniably powerful, but she was nothing like Ethan when it came to fighting. Her style was brutal, messy, and downright violent. Blood and gore splattered everywhere, leaving a chaotic scene in her wake. At Nobleman at. She turned her head and saw Ethan approaching, his steps steady, his expression calm. She immediately understood what he meant without him saying a word. Taking a few steps back, she ceded the battlefield to him. Gideon, on the other hand, narrowed his eyes as he watched Ethan. His heart skipped a beat. The intense battle earlier had left him disoriented, and in the chaos, he had completely forgotten about the most dangerous person in the room. Ethan hadn't made a single move the entire time. And no one knew what his awakened ability was. Gideon didn't dare let his guard down. Forcing himself to focus, he directed all his attention toward Ethan. But Ethan kept walking, his pace unchanging, the distance between them shrinking with every step. What's he up to? Gideon thought, confused. He watched as Ethan came closer and closer, until he was right in front of him. At this point, Gideon had no choice but to act. Die. Gideon roared, his voice like the screech of grinding metal. He swung his massive, steel-like fist straight at Ethan. In that instant, Ethan's eyes flashed red. Domain of the dead activated. A suffocating pressure filled the air, enveloping Gideon completely. Over the past few days, Ethan had been holed up at home, evolving and growing stronger. Now, his domain of the dead was more powerful than ever. Gideon felt as if his body had been plunged into the depths of the ocean. The crushing weight made it nearly impossible for him to move. Ethan sidestepped effortlessly, dodging Gideon's punch. As he passed by, he extended his hand, his fingers piercing straight into Gideon's skull. In one fluid motion, he pulled out the crystal core lodged inside. The entire sequence was seamless, clean, and efficient, like someone casually picking up an object. It didn't take the slightest effort. What? Gideon's face froze in shock. The life drained from his body in an instant. His metallic skin faded away, revealing his original form underneath. His body tilted backward and collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. He was dead. Gideon's eyes remained wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Even in death, he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. He died with unresolved confusion, unable to rest in peace. The whole thing had taken only a few seconds, the time it took Ethan to walk a few steps. Extracting Gideon's crystal core had been as easy as reaching into a bag and pulling something out. Chris and the others were dumbfounded. It was their first time witnessing such a method of killing. Gideon's body looked completely intact, yet his crystal core had been removed. A phantom infected. There was no doubt about it. Ethan was a phantom infected. A chill ran down their spines, and their hair stood on end. Fear gripped them as they became even more certain. Ethan was the zombie king of the phantom infected, capable of killing without leaving a trace. Gideon's three subordinates were equally stunned, their faces frozen in disbelief. Their boss just died. Just like that. What the hell had just happened? While one of them was still in shock, Sean seized the opportunity. He swung his fist into the man's chest, shattering his bones with a sickening crunch. The man let out a scream before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. Damn it. The remaining two finally realized the situation was hopeless. No matter how hard they fought, it was all in vain. Their will to fight crumbled. Their mental defenses shattered, and they were quickly overwhelmed. Sean took them down with ease. And with that, the battle was over. Silence returned to the room. The KTV lounge was a wreck, littered with bodies. 3 hostages and 13 members of the Blackhand Legion, all dead. Ethan, you're incredible. You took down that metal guy like it was nothing. Sean exclaimed, his eyes wide with amazement. You're not too bad yourself, Ethan replied. He hadn't expected Sean, of all people, to awaken such a powerful ability. Sean burst out laughing. Ha ha ha, so you noticed, huh? The others were busy cleaning up the battlefield while Mia walked over to the bodies of the 3 hostages. She stood there, staring down at them with an unblinking gaze. It seemed like she felt regret that they hadn't been able to save them in time. Then, she crouched down, her fingers piercing into their skulls one by one, carefully extracting their neurocores. Enemy crystal cores are valuable, but we shouldn't waste our own people's neurocores either, she muttered under her breath. Maybe it was because she'd lived through hard times, but Mia had a habit of being frugal. She was, in a way, a practical and resourceful girl. Meanwhile, Chris and the others were off to the side, holding a communicator and reporting the situation to the headquarters of the shelter. The Blackhand Legion members have been dealt with. Total number of hostiles, 13. Actual kills, 16. At the same time, Ethan had also embraced his own version of frugality. He wandered upstairs and downstairs, collecting all 16 corpses and storing them in his spatial storage ring. Sean, watching this unfold, was completely dumbfounded. He couldn't help but blurt out, "Wait, where'd the bodies go? Did you just take them?" "Yeah," Ethan replied casually. "Packing them up to take back as dog food." "Damn." Sean scratched his head, looking a little bewildered. Was Ethan treating this like a buffet? And now he was even packing leftovers to go. Elsewhere, Mia and the others had found the supplies that had been stolen. To be honest, it wasn't much. Ethan glanced over the haul. 5 boxes of instant noodles, a few crates of canned beef, 2 bags of rice, and a bag of flour. There were also some fruit cans, chocolate, and other snacks, but most of it was expired. Gideon and his crew had already eaten a good chunk of it. It was clear that the shelter was seriously short on resources. The fact that they'd sent Mia, their number 001, and Sean, their number 002, for such a small stash showed just how desperate they were. All right, let's head back, Mia said. Sean's face lit up with excitement. Hey, we've got food this time. Behind them, Chris and the other 3 had taken on the role of porters, hauling the rice and crates. They looked a bit disheveled, struggling under the weight of the supplies. What's more, the 4 of them were absolutely terrified of Ethan. They didn't dare get close to him, keeping a safe distance as they followed far behind. Ethan, why don't you come back to the shelter with us? Sean asked. No, Ethan replied, shaking his head. Sean looked confused. Why not? I don't need a shelter, Ethan said simply. Oh, Sean nodded, though it was clear he didn't fully understand. By now, they had reached the street where they'd first met. It was time to part ways. Mia's large eyes fixed on Ethan. When will we see you again? If the shelter ever runs out of food, you can trade crystal cores with me for supplies, Ethan said after a moment of thought. All right, Mia agreed without hesitation. It was a straightforward business arrangement. To make things easier, the 2 exchanged contact information online so they could stay in touch and chat if needed. With everything settled, Ethan said his goodbyes. This is it. See you next time. Yeah, see you, Mia replied. Without looking back, she turned and walked away. Find more to read at Empire. Chris and the others, weighed down with supplies, made a wide detour around Ethan, clearly still afraid of him. They hurried to catch up with Mia, practically jogging to keep pace. Bye, Ethan. Let's chat online later, Sean called out, waving as he turned to leave. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the street. Their shadows stretched long across the ground as Mia and her group gradually disappeared into the distance. Ethan stood there, watching them until they vanished at the end of the street. Then, from the alleys, side streets, and nearby buildings, zombies began to emerge. One by one, they gathered behind Ethan. Among them were hulking bulldozers, the eerie Laura, and even the PhD zombie. They all assembled in an orderly fashion, standing silently behind him. One of them finally broke the silence. Boss, were those your friends? C-53 treasure. Ethan gave a soft response, then turned and walked toward the building. Laura tilted her head, looking a little puzzled. The boss has friends. That was new. But before she could dwell on it, a mouthwatering aroma hit her like a wave. As Ethan walked away, he casually tossed out a pile of corpses, some of them still warm. Hey. Laura grinned wide, deciding not to overthink it. Mia and her group had walked quite a distance without encountering any zombies. It wasn't until they left Ethan's territory that the terrifying figures began to reappear. But they were just low-level zombies, weak enough that even regular people could handle them. For Awakeners, they posed no threat at all. Mia, did you notice something? Chris suddenly asked. Notice what? Mia turned to look at him. Chris explained, we didn't see any zombies until we left that 5-star zombie nest. That means, your friend, is probably the king of that nest. Explore new worlds at Empire. Oh, Mia nodded, her expression calm and unreadable. Wait, that's it. Chris froze, stunned. Her reaction wasn't what he expected. Shouldn't she be shocked? Beside them, Sean scratched his head. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but after everything they'd been through, he was starting to piece things together. Mia, do you think Ethan is really a zombie? Sean asked hesitantly. Human or zombie, does it matter? Mia's voice paused for a moment before she continued, as long as he's Ethan, that's all that matters. Near the building, the setting sun painted the sky a deep crimson, like blood smeared across the heavens. A few black crows circled overhead, cawing as they flew. Under the desolate, apocalyptic sky, a few zombies were feasting on fresh flesh. The boss is the best. He goes out hunting himself and brings food back for us. Laura's chin was smeared with blood as she spoke. The nearby zombies nodded enthusiastically in agreement. In most other nests, it was the underlings who hunted and offered their spoils to the zombie king. But Ethan was the complete opposite, and this gesture left Laura and the others deeply moved. The zombies were happily devouring their meal, but one of them, Bulldozer, sat off to the side, lost in thought. His expression carried a hint of guilt. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd failed in his duties. There had been humans hiding in the area he was supposed to patrol, and he hadn't noticed. Yet Ethan hadn't blamed him. Instead, he'd brought back food for everyone. This only made Bulldozer feel worse. Laura glanced over at him. Not eating. Not hungry, Bulldozer replied, crossing his arms and turning his head away with a huff. He was already planning to hunt some humans himself to make up for his failure and show his loyalty to the boss. Laura, while intelligent, wasn't perceptive enough to guess what he was thinking. She had no idea what was going on in his head. If you don't eat now, it'll all be gone soon. Then you'll have nothing left, she warned. Oh. Bulldozer's eyes flicked toward the pile of flesh, and despite himself, he licked his lips. He couldn't help but feel tempted. Maybe just a bite or two, he muttered. The next few days passed peacefully, with nothing significant happening. Ethan stayed holed up in his home, living a leisurely life. He spent his days gathering intel, absorbing energy, and occasionally chatting with Mia online. The hunger, violence, and danger of the outside world seemed completely disconnected from him. The area around the building had become his personal paradise. Ethan had considered it before. Mia and Sean were both strong, and with his food supply being more than sufficient, it wouldn't be a problem to let them stay by his side. If trouble ever came knocking, they'd be two powerful allies. But Mia and Sean weren't just ordinary people. They were awakeners from Refuge 001 and 002, practically celebrities in their own right. And as the saying goes, the tallest tree catches the wind. If they stayed, peace would be out of the question. So, Ethan decided to let go of the idea for now. It was better for them to remain in the refuge. After all, they could still maintain a cooperative relationship from afar. Downstairs, Laura and the other zombies were bored out of their minds. Every day, they wandered the streets, patrolling the territory. But no matter how hard they tried, there was never anything to show for it. The most dejected of them all was Bulldozer. With his current level of intelligence, roughly that of a 7 or 8-year-old child, he still couldn't let go of his guilt over his earlier failure. At the moment, his massive frame was slumped on the side of the street, his broad back radiating a sense of melancholy. Where can I go to kill someone? I need to make up for my mistake. I have to hunt something, bring it back as an offering to the boss. Otherwise, I'll just keep feeling guilty. But the main city had long since fallen. It was a zombie stronghold now, with not a single human in sight. At best, he might be able to fish a few oversized rats out of the sewers. At Novelban. Still, the thought of presenting 2 sewer rats to Ethan as an offering made Bulldozer shudder. He was pretty sure the boss would crush him on the spot. What do I do? As Bulldozer sat there, racking his brain, the sound of flapping wings suddenly reached his ears. A red-eyed crow landed on a nearby street lamp. Under the blood-red sky, the crow's beak was smeared with blood, and it was holding a human eyeball in its mouth. The scene was grotesque, to say the least. Bulldozer's small eyes lit up as he stared at the bird, as if he'd just discovered a treasure. Sensing his gaze, the crow tilted its head back and swallowed the eyeball in one gulp. Then it shot Bulldozer a disdainful look. Big idiot, the crow croaked. Bulldozer was speechless. He felt a flicker of annoyance but quickly swallowed it down. He needed something from the bird, so he let it slide. Hey, little shadow bird, do you know where I can find prey? He asked. Of course I do. The crow's crimson eyes blinked slyly. Bulldozer perked up, his excitement barely contained. Where? Tell me. I'm not telling you, the crow replied smugly. Bulldozer scratched his head, feeling a bit awkward. He figured the bird was still holding a grudge from that time he'd tried to catch it. He hadn't even managed to grab it, but apparently, the attempt was enough to sour their relationship. Come on, just tell me. I need to hunt something to offer to the boss. Too dangerous. Too dangerous. If you go, you won't come back, the crow warned. PFF'd. As if. Bulldozer scoffed. He didn't believe it for a second. He was one of the most well-known zombie kings in the area, and besides, he worked for Ethan. How could he not come back? Just tell me. If I catch something, I'll share it with you. The crow didn't respond immediately. Its eyes darted around as it thought for a moment. Then, with a few flaps of its wings, it took off into the air. Follow me. Follow me, it called. Hee hee hee. Bulldozer let out a goofy laugh, grinning like an overgrown child. He stood up from the curb, his massive frame towering over the street. The red-eyed crow flew down the road, its wings flapping rhythmically as it muttered to itself. Treasure. Treasure. Oh. Bulldozer's jaw dropped into an O shape. It seemed there wasn't just prey, there was treasure too. His curiosity was piqued. Could it be a big, juicy prey? He wondered, his excitement growing. Without hesitation, he followed the crow. The bird soared through the air, its speed impressive, but Bulldozer was no slouch. Despite his massive size, he moved with surprising agility, leaping between buildings and scaling walls like a giant, nimble ape. The two of them, one in the air, the other on the ground, chased each other deeper and deeper into the city. It quickly became clear that the location the crow was leading him to was far beyond Ethan's territory. C-54 squelch. Bulldozer and Raven sped forward, darting through the wreckage-strewn streets. A few zombies noticed them, tilting their heads back to let out low growls. Clearly, they had wandered out of their usual territory. About 10 minutes later, in the distance, Bulldozer spotted a skyscraper with thick black smoke billowing from it, forming a dark cloud in the sky. A helicopter had crashed into the middle floors of the building, its wreckage engulfed in flames. The building's floor-to-ceiling windows were completely shattered, revealing a chaotic scene inside. On one of the middle floors, a group of humans was locked in combat with zombies. And that wasn't all. Around the skyscraper, an unending tide of zombies surged forward like a relentless wave, surrounding the humans and cutting off any escape. Some zombies had already breached the building, while others climbed the walls like insects, their sheer numbers creating a grotesque and overwhelming spectacle. There really are people in there, Bulldozer muttered under his breath. Treasure. Treasure. Raven flapped its wings, repeating the word like a mantra. Squinting, Bulldozer focused on the scene and noticed that one of the humans was clutching a metal case. The case was handcuffed to his wrist, and the others in the group were clearly protecting him. Enjoy exclusive content from Empire. It was obvious, the case was incredibly important to them. What's in that thing? Bulldozer wondered aloud, his curiosity piqued. The man holding the case was Maxwell Hunt, a high-ranking executive at Genesis Biotech. He had just retrieved something of immense value from the company's headquarters, now locked securely inside the case. Unfortunately, on his way back via helicopter, disaster struck. A mutated flying beast, a massive black bird, had collided with the aircraft. Its body, as powerful as a cannonball, shattered the helicopter's windshield, and its razor-sharp beak pierced the pilot's eye socket. The helicopter spiraled out of control and crashed into zombie territory. Luckily, the passengers were all awakeners, humans with enhanced abilities. Aside from the pilot, everyone survived the crash. But the swarm of zombies in the area had quickly turned their situation into a life-or-death struggle. Hurry! Zombies are climbing up, Maxwell shouted urgently. Beside him, an awakener with ice-based powers stepped forward. A chilling aura radiated from his hands as he conjured countless ice spikes, launching them at the zombies scaling the walls outside the shattered windows. The ice spikes were razor-sharp, far more lethal than bullets. They tore through the zombies, sending them plummeting from the high-rise. But there were just too many of them. The horde kept coming, wave after wave, and in the distance, a zombie king loomed, overseeing the attack. On the rooftop of a 3-story building across the street, a tall, menacing figure stood watching. Its mouth was filled with jagged fangs, and its glowing red eyes radiated malice. This was its territory, the area it patrolled and controlled. It hadn't expected such a windfall today, a helicopter literally falling from the sky. The Zombie King had immediately rallied its minions to attack. While the human awakeners were strong, even the fiercest tiger couldn't fend off a pack of wolves forever. The awakeners were burning through their powers, and it was only a matter of time before exhaustion set in. The Zombie King simply had to wait and let its horde wear them down. Meanwhile, in the distance, Bulldozer and Raven were staring at the scene, wide-eyed. Let's go. We'll grab that treasure for ourselves. Raven squawked, its red eyes gleaming. As it turned out, Raven was the one who had taken down the helicopter in the first place. Seeing the treasure fall into someone else's hands was something it couldn't accept. Fine by me. Who's afraid of a fight? Bulldozer grinned, unfazed. Even though they were deep in enemy territory, surrounded by countless zombies, he wasn't about to back down. Without hesitation, they charged toward the battlefield. Bulldozer moved with incredible agility, barreling through the horde and knocking zombies aside like bowling pins as he made his way to the base of the skyscraper. With a powerful leap, he launched himself onto the building's wall. Like a real-life Spider-Man, he began scaling the structure with astonishing speed and precision. Watch out! There's a mutant zombie, Maxwell shouted, his voice filled with tension. Bulldozer's size and speed made him stand out immediately, catching Maxwell's attention. The ice-wielding awakener beside him wasted no time, summoning another barrage of ice spikes and hurling them downward at the approaching threat. Roar! Bulldozer let out a furious bellow, raising his right hand to shield his face. The sharp ice spikes slammed into his palm, but his thick, leathery skin absorbed most of the impact. The spikes only managed to pierce the surface, drawing blood but causing no significant damage. Crack! With a savage grip, Bulldozer crushed the ice spikes embedded in his hand into shards. Then, with a powerful push from his legs, he launched himself upward, leaping over 60 feet in one bound. The gap between him and the human's defensive position was rapidly closing. This zombie is strong, Maxwell muttered, his frown deepening as he watched Bulldozer approach. On the opposite rooftop, the towering zombie king, who had been observing the battle, was equally surprised. It didn't recognize Bulldozer as one of its subordinates. Whose underling is this? How is he so fierce? But seeing Bulldozer attacking the humans, the zombie king didn't dwell on it. Instead, it signaled its minions to assist him, assuming they were on the same side. Bulldozer was indeed ferocious. His massive hand gripped the windowsill, and with a single pull, his muscular frame vaulted into the building. The humans inside instinctively retreated, their faces pale with fear. With the windowsill breached, the zombies outside began pouring in one after another. Their bloodthirsty eyes gleamed as they snarled and lunged at the humans. "I'll hold them off," shouted the ice-wielding awakener. He stepped forward, both hands outstretched, as an intense chill filled the air. Frost began to spread rapidly, accompanied by the sharp cracking sounds of ice forming. Before him, an ice wall was beginning to take shape, thick and solid. But just as the wall was about to fully form, a sudden shadow streaked through the air. It moved with terrifying speed, striking from the side like a dagger. A sharp, black beak pierced straight into the awakener's temple. Squelch! Warm blood sprayed everywhere as the ice awakener collapsed to the ground, lifeless. What the? Maxwell's eyes widened in shock as he turned to see the attacker. It was the same massive black bird that had brought down their helicopter. This wasn't a coincidence. It had all been part of a calculated plan. The red-eyed raven wasn't just any bird. It was a predator capable of devouring two humans in one sitting, its potential as a threat immeasurable. With the ice awakener dead, the zombies surged forward. In groups of 2 or 3, they tackled the remaining humans to the ground, tearing into them with teeth and claws. The scene descended into utter chaos, filled with the sounds of snarling, roaring, and agonized screams. Bulldozer ignored the carnage around him. His focus was singular and unwavering. With a few powerful strides, he closed the distance to Maxwell, his massive hand reaching out to grab the case. "Treasure!" Bulldozer growled, his eyes locked on the prize. "Huh." Maxwell's face twisted in desperation as he clung to the case with all his strength. "Get away from me." But Bulldozer's strength was overwhelming. With a single yank, he nearly pulled both the case and Maxwell into his grasp. At Nobleman at. Maxwell's eyes turned bloodshot as a wave of heat radiated from his body. He was a fire-type awakener, but the earlier battle had drained him of most of his energy. Now, he was running on fumes, using the last reserves of his strength. Flames erupted from Maxwell's left arm, engulfing it in a blazing inferno. He grabbed Bulldozer's wrist with his burning hand, trying to force him to let go. Sizzle. The acrid smell of burning flesh filled the air as smoke rose from Bulldozer's arm. The stench was nauseating, like charred pigskin. "Let go of me," Maxwell roared, his voice hoarse. "Treasure." Bulldozer growled again, his obsession with the case overriding the pain. Even as his flesh burned, he refused to release his grip, his single-minded determination driving him forward. Sweat poured down Maxwell's face in large beads, his complexion pale and his vision blurring. His body was nearing its limit, completely drained from the relentless fighting and the strain of using his powers. Squelch. Seizing the moment, Bulldozer yanked the case with all his might. The sickening sound of tearing flesh and snapping bone echoed through the room as Maxwell's right arm was ripped apart at the elbow. Blood sprayed everywhere. C-55. This one's a surprise. Maxwell let out a blood-curdling scream as he collapsed to the ground. Without the protection of the flames, the surrounding zombies swarmed him, burying him under the relentless tide of the horde. The prize is ours. Bulldozer held the box in his massive hands, the handcuffs still attached to half of a severed arm dangling from it. The few remaining humans in the area had already been torn apart and devoured. The zombies, victorious in this battle, were in a frenzy of excitement. Rarg. Bulldozer joined in, raising the box high above his head like a trophy, as if he'd just won the World Cup. There was a hint of showboating in his actions, even though he had no idea what was actually inside the box. What made it even more amusing was how the surrounding zombies played along, letting out low growls and howls, celebrating with him. Big idiot. What are you showing off for? Get moving already. Came the sharp, bird-like voice of Crow. Huh, oh, right. Bulldozer snapped out of his excitement. This wasn't his turf. It was dangerous here, and he needed to leave, fast. He quickly toned down his bravado, clutching the box tightly to his chest, and began to sneak away as inconspicuously as possible. Hey, stop right there. Suddenly, a deep, gravelly voice, like stones grinding together, echoed from behind him. It was the towering zombie king, the one who ruled this territory. Enjoy new chapters from Empire. Bulldozer froze mid-step, his massive frame stiffening. He didn't turn around, leaving only his broad back for the zombie king to see. The arrival of the zombie king silenced the rest of the horde. The lesser zombies all turned their attention to their leader, then followed his gaze to the hulking figure of Bulldozer. In an instant, Bulldozer became the center of attention. Sometimes being the star of the show isn't such a good thing, Bulldozer muttered to himself. The towering zombie king had already figured out that Bulldozer didn't belong to this territory. Hand over what you're carrying. Hand over my ass. Bulldozer snapped back without hesitation, then barked at Crow, run. Without waiting for a response, he bolted, not even glancing back. His massive frame barreled forward, smashing through several walls as he charged through the building. The zombie king's glowing, menacing eyes narrowed. He immediately realized something was wrong. Get him. Rarg. The horde roared in unison, chasing after Bulldozer and Crow with feral intensity. But the two were incredibly fast. Bulldozer, in particular, was like a human wrecking ball, smashing through anything in his path and maintaining a straight line sprint no matter what stood in his way. Finally, he reached the edge of the building. Without hesitation, he leapt off, soaring through the air from a height of several stories. Crap. Mid-air, Bulldozer realized something was wrong. It wasn't the fall that worried him. He wasn't afraid of that. The problem was the street below. It was packed with a dense swarm of zombies, as if they'd been waiting for him all along. Boom. Bulldozer landed in the middle of the horde with a thunderous crash, the sheer force of his impact cracking the pavement and sending several zombies flying. But the rest of the horde wasted no time. They lunged at him from all directions. Bulldozer charged forward like a raging bull, plowing through the mass of undead. Even when zombies clung to his back, biting and clawing at him, he didn't slow down or pay them any mind. But then, from behind, the towering zombie king appeared, leading a group of elite zombies in pursuit. If they caught him, no matter how strong Bulldozer was, he'd be torn to shreds. Head for the rooftop. The rooftop. Crow's sharp voice echoed from above as it circled in the air, offering advice. Oh. Bulldozer glanced up. Sure enough, there was a tall building ahead. Without hesitation, he charged forward, took a massive leap, and latched onto the wall, climbing upward with incredible speed. In just a few moments, he reached the top. The regular zombies couldn't climb, but the elite ones, those were a different story. They were already hot on his heels. Stop running. Bulldozer turned his head and saw the towering zombie king leading the pack, closing in fast. Without missing a beat, Bulldozer sprinted across the rooftop, leaping from one building to the next like a world-class parkour athlete. His massive frame moved with surprising agility, but the zombie king was even faster. After all, Bulldozer was built for raw power, not speed. Against an opponent of the same level, he was at a clear disadvantage. The zombie king was gaining on him, and behind it, hundreds of elite zombies followed like a pack of ravenous wolves, relentless in their pursuit. I can't outrun them, Bulldozer muttered, clutching the box tightly. He glanced back at the approaching zombie king. If things got any worse, he'd have no choice but to fight. But before he could act, Crow's voice rang out again, calm and sharp. You need to find a place to hide. Huh, oh, right. Bulldozer's eyes lit up. That was a good idea. Why hadn't he thought of it? Ahead of him, the rooftop's edge loomed closer. The building was over 300 feet tall. Instead of aiming for the next rooftop, Bulldozer made a bold decision. He dove straight off the edge, heading for the street below. The Zombie King slowed, sensing something was off. Bulldozer's massive figure plummeted downward, disappearing from view in an instant. The Zombie King rushed to the edge and peered down, scanning the street below. To its surprise, the street was empty. Bulldozer was nowhere to be seen. "Boss, where'd he go?" one of the elite zombies asked, equally confused as it joined the search. The Zombie King frowned, thinking for a moment. "He's still nearby. He's hiding. Spread out and find him." "Yes, sir." The elite zombies scattered, combing the area. Meanwhile, Bulldozer and Crow had already slipped into a small room inside the building. When Bulldozer had jumped off the rooftop, he hadn't landed on the street. Instead, he'd grabbed onto a windowsill mid-fall and swung himself inside the building. Now, he crouched in the corner of the room, his massive frame awkwardly hunched over, clutching the box tightly. "Little shadow bird, that was a great idea," Bulldozer whispered, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "Of course it was," Crow replied smugly, its red eyes gleaming. "But what now? We're stuck here. There's no way out." Bulldozer frowned. He knew the Zombie King wouldn't give up. Its minions would only gather in greater numbers, eventually surrounding the entire area. It was only a matter of time before they found him. As the minutes ticked by, the situation grew more dire. Crow, ever the problem solver, flapped its wings and said, "Don't worry. I'll go get help. You just stay hidden." "What? How are you going to get out? The whole place is crawling with them. If you go out there, they'll spot you and eat you alive." Bulldozer protested, his voice filled with concern. Crow blinked its red eyes, pausing for a moment. Then it gave Bulldozer a look that could only be described as the avian equivalent of "Are you stupid?" At Nobleman at. "I can fly, dumbass," it said flatly, flapping its wings for emphasis before darting out the window. Bulldozer was speechless. He'd completely forgotten that birds could fly. As he sat there in silence, he couldn't help but feel a little touched. Crow could have flown away at any time, but it had stayed to help him. It had waited until he was safely hidden before leaving to get help. "Yeah, it's a good bird," Bulldozer muttered to himself, nodding in approval. But just as he was starting to relax, he noticed a familiar black shape circling back toward the window. Crow landed on the windowsill, its red eyes gleaming as it stared at him. Bulldozer was confused. Why are you back?" "Don't worry about me. Just go. Give me the box," Crow said, its tone sharp and direct. Knock, knock, knock. Not long after, Ethan heard a tapping sound on his window. He turned to look and saw Crow perched on the windowsill. But what really caught his attention was the box it was holding in its beak, a sleek, metallic container with a shiny silver finish. On its surface was a red circle with the letters, GB, in the center. It was the unmistakable logo of Genesis Biotech. "What's with the fancy delivery? You're bringing me gifts now?" Ethan asked lazily as he opened the window, his tone casual and amused. Crow's red eyes glinted as it dropped the box onto the windowsill. "This one's a surprise," it said cryptically. Ellipsis. C56. So where did it go wrong? A surprise. Ethan was curious. What kind of surprise could it be? The box was made entirely of alloy, incredibly sturdy, but in Ethan's hands, it felt as pliable as clay. He picked it up, gave it a light tug, and the lid popped open effortlessly. Inside, his gaze fell on rows of ampules filled with a pale blue, transparent liquid. Beside them was a stack of lab reports detailing the liquid's properties. Ethan picked up the report and skimmed through it. X virus. Experimental results. When injected into low-tier zombies, the X virus increases cellular activity, granting rapid healing abilities, heightened reflexes, and a state of hyperexcitation. It stimulates the nervous system, significantly boosting reaction speed. Zombie test subject 1. After injecting the X virus into a D-class zombie, its decayed body began to regenerate. Within 24 hours, the body reached peak condition, successfully merging with the virus. Zombie test subject 2. The report continued, detailing the experiments and their results. 15 trials in total, all successful, with no adverse effects on the zombies. "So, this is a zombie evolution serum," Ethan muttered, raising an eyebrow. He recalled hearing rumors about Genesis Biotech experimenting with zombies. It wasn't surprising they'd come up with something like this. It really was a surprise. Of course, with Ethan's abilities, he had no use for such low-level creations. His own healing factor was already off the charts, and more importantly, he never got injured in the first place. But these X-virus ampules. They could be useful for his subordinates. The report claimed that even a D-class zombie could gain enhanced healing and reflexes after injection. So, what would happen if he used it on his elite zombies? Ethan smirked. Genesis Biotech's experiments clearly weren't thorough enough. He figured he could run a few tests of his own and add some new data to the mix. Where did you get this stuff? He asked. Bulldozer and I raided someone else's territory. Red-eyed Raven replied proudly. Not bad. Ethan praised casually before asking, where's Bulldozer? Oh, right. Bulldozer got trapped by a horde of zombies and couldn't make it back. I came to ask for backup, Red-eyed Raven said, as if just now remembering the reason for his visit. Quote. Ethan was speechless. He'd barely complimented the guy, and now this. Bulldozer was one of his most reliable enforcers, and he'd even managed to bring back something useful. Ethan couldn't just leave him stranded. Without hesitation, Ethan issued orders to Laura and the PhD zombie. At that moment, Laura was kneeling on a rooftop, sobbing into her hands. The territory had been too peaceful lately, and she was bored out of her mind. Her heart ached for the thrill of battle. But the moment Ethan's command reached her, her wailing stopped abruptly. Her head snapped up, and a twisted grin spread across her face. Hey, tilde. Meanwhile, the PhD zombie was strolling down a deserted street, flanked by a procession of zombies. A few of them growled angrily, their rage palpable. Their big brother, Bulldozer, was trapped. This was unacceptable. They had to tear apart whatever stood in their way to set things right. Moments later, the zombies began to converge on the street, forming a massive horde. Their collective bloodlust filled the air, creating an oppressive atmosphere. The zombie horde was ready, a force of destruction that could shake the very foundations of the apocalyptic city. Move out, Ethan commanded. At his signal, the zombie horde surged forward, a tidal wave of death and fury. Overhead, a single raven darted through the dim sky, leading the way. Behind it, thousands of zombies charged, their murderous intent palpable. They moved like an unstoppable flood, their presence making the entire city tremble beneath their feet. Meanwhile, Bulldozer was still hiding in a small room, his massive frame curled up awkwardly, looking pitifully dejected. Why aren't they here yet? Outside, the horde of zombies howled and snarled, their cries filled with mockery and menace. From the doorway, faint footsteps echoed. Peeking through a crack in the crumbling wall, Bulldozer spotted an elite zombie entering the building. Its nose twitched like a dog's, sniffing the air incessantly. This zombie wasn't particularly strong, but its sense of smell had evolved to be incredibly sharp. Following the faintest trace of scent, it was closing in on Bulldozer step by step. What do I do now? Scratching his head, Bulldozer realized he was about to be discovered. In such a dire situation, he had no choice but to rely on his wits. And soon enough, he came up with a plan. He could throw a rock to create a distraction and lure the zombie away. Yeah, that's a solid plan, who says? I'm a big idiot. Feeling quite pleased with himself, Bulldozer rummaged around with his massive hand, quickly picking up a broken brick. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled it out the window. Whether the sharp-nosed zombie took the bait or not, he couldn't be sure. But the brick, flying in a perfect arc through the air, ended up smacking the towering zombie king square on the head. Who threw that brick? The zombie king roared in fury, looking around wildly. One of his lackeys, who had seen everything, pointed toward the building. Boss, the brick came from inside. There's someone in there. The zombie king paused, his expression darkening as he pieced it together. That bastard's hiding in the building. Get him. Roar. Several elite zombies let out bloodthirsty howls and leapt onto the walls, scrambling toward the window. Hearing the commotion outside, Bulldozer squinted his small eyes, a faint sense of unease creeping over him. After a moment of thought, he muttered, "Did I mess up somewhere?" But before he could figure it out, terrifying zombie faces appeared at the window. They spotted Bulldozer immediately, letting out guttural roars as they lunged at him with incredible speed. At the same time, the zombie horde surrounding the building began converging on his location. Crap. Bulldozer swung his massive fist, sending one of the lunging zombies flying, then turned and bolted. As always, he relied on brute force, smashing through wall after wall in his escape. But even as he bulldozed his way through the building, he couldn't help but reflect, my plan was perfect. Where did it go wrong? Bam. Just as Bulldozer smashed through another wall, a massive fist came out of nowhere and slammed into his forehead. The sheer force sent him stumbling backward, landing on the ground with a heavy thud. You've got some nerve, throwing a brick at me. The Zombie King growled, his voice dripping with rage. Bulldozer squinted up at him, starting to piece together what had happened. The Zombie King loomed over him, radiating murderous intent. Suddenly, sharp bone spikes began sprouting from his knuckles, resembling Wolverine's claws. Bulldozer, seeing this ability for the first time, couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity. What's this? Bone spurs. Die. The Zombie King slashed downward, the razor-sharp bone spikes slicing through the air toward Bulldozer. In the nick of time, Bulldozer raised his arm to block. But even with his thick skin and tough muscles, the spikes pierced straight through, leaving a bloody hole. Ah! That hurts. Bulldozer yelped, stumbling backward to dodge. The Zombie King lunged forward, his bone spikes driving forward like unrelenting spears. Bulldozer barely had time to react, raising his other arm to block. But it was no use. Whether he used his hands or his arms, each desperate defense only ended with another jagged puncture. Added Nobleman at. Experience new tales on Empire. His flesh tore under the unyielding assault, fresh blood spraying with every strike. Within moments, his body was riddled with gory holes. Meanwhile, the elite zombies behind him were closing in fast, their roars echoing through the building. C-57, the whole crew's here. Bring it on. Bulldozer's eyes turned bloodshot in an instant. His massive frame charged straight at the Zombie King, completely ignoring the pain of bone spikes piercing through his palms. He grabbed the creature's fist with a vice-like grip. The towering Zombie King, overwhelmed by Bulldozer's brute strength, was forced backward, unable to hold its ground. Boom. The two of them smashed through the last remaining outer wall and plummeted from the high-rise building. Even mid-air, they continued to grapple, claw, and pummel each other with savage ferocity. Crash. Both of them slammed into the ground with a deafening impact, causing the entire street to tremble as cracks spread across the pavement. In terms of raw power, the towering Zombie King was no match for Bulldozer. It was pinned beneath him as Bulldozer rained down heavy punches, one after another. But the moment didn't last long. A swarm of zombies on the street immediately lunged at Bulldozer, sinking their grotesque jaws into him. Roar. Bulldozer let out a pained howl, grabbing one of the zombies by the neck and hurling it far into the distance. He spun around and delivered a brutal elbow strike to another, twisting its head 360 degrees as blood spurted from its mouth and eyes. However, the Zombie King beneath him seized the opportunity. Its sharp bone spikes shot upward, stabbing Bulldozer right in the backside. Arg! Bulldozer let out a guttural scream and leapt off in agony. But by now, his vision was filled with nothing but the grotesque faces of zombies. The horde had completely engulfed him, piling on layer after layer. The zombies' razor-sharp teeth tore into his flesh relentlessly. Pain racked his entire body. Even someone as tough as Bulldozer was on the verge of being ripped apart. Is this it? Am I really going to die here? Bulldozer thought, despair washing over him as he found himself unable to fight back. Suddenly, a sharp, eerie caw pierced the air. Caw. 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 Big idiot. Big idiot. A pitch-black crow swooped down from the sky, its mournful cries echoing like the prelude to a massacre. The ground began to quake violently. It sounded like an army of thousands was charging in. Boom. 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 A suffocating pressure filled the air. One by one, the zombies piled on Bulldozer began to explode, their bodies bursting apart in a spray of blood and gore. The stench of death filled the street. What the hell is going on? Enjoy exclusive adventures from Empire. Bulldozer felt the crushing weight on his body lighten bit by bit. When the last zombie exploded into a bloody mist, his vision finally cleared. Through the haze of blood and carnage, he saw a face, handsome beyond words. Ethan stood there, dressed in a pristine white shirt, completely untouched by the blood-soaked battlefield around him. His expression was calm as he looked down at Bulldozer. Man, you're in rough shape, Ethan remarked, his gaze sweeping over Bulldozer's battered body. Bulldozer was drenched in blood, his entire frame dyed red. His skin was riddled with bite marks and punctured by bone spikes, leaving him looking like a human pincushion. Turning my guy into a pincushion. That's just cruel, don't you think? Boss. Bulldozer's eyes welled up with tears. At that moment, Ethan felt like a divine savior, descending from the heavens to rescue him at his darkest hour. Bulldozer glanced around and noticed something strange. The two groups of zombies were now fighting each other. They clawed, bit, and gouged at one another with savage brutality. Among them, Laura moved like a phantom. Her bone claws sliced through a zombie's head, sending it flying. Her figure flickered, disappearing and reappearing in front of another zombie in the blink of an eye. With a swift motion, her claws slashed through its neck, severing its head cleanly. Laura's face twisted into a sinister grin. She was like a grim reaper on the battlefield, leaving a trail of decapitated corpses in her wake. On the other side, the PhD zombie led his own group of zombies into the fray. With each punch, he crushed a lesser zombie into pulp. Occasionally, he unleashed his psychic powers, launching devastating mental attacks on the opposing horde. The whole crew's here. If zombies could cry, Bulldozer would have been bawling his eyes out by now. Meanwhile, the Bone Spike Zombie King was utterly shaken. Out of nowhere, a massive horde of zombies had surged in, swallowing up its own forces. Among them were elite zombies, moving like relentless killing machines, their savagery unmatched. And then it saw him. Amid the chaos of the zombie melee, a tall figure stood out, dressed in spotless white, his gaze cold and indifferent, fixed directly on the Bone Spike Zombie King. The Zombie King couldn't sense his aura, but an inexplicable fear gripped its heart. It was a fear that came from deep within its soul. This feeling, it had only ever felt this way in the presence of its master. You, how dare you step into our territory? The Bone Spike Zombie King roared, its voice trembling with both anger and fear. Ethan didn't even bother to respond. To him, this was just a small fry, not worth his time. With a mere thought, his domain of the dead expanded outward, spreading dozens of feet in an instant. The Bone Spike Zombie King froze in place, as if submerged in a sea of blood. Boss, let me handle this. Bulldozer suddenly sprang to his feet, as if all his wounds had stopped hurting. His eyes burned with fury as he glared at the Bone Spike Zombie King, eager to settle the score for the earlier, butt-stabbing incident. All right, go ahead, Ethan said with a nod. With two powerful strides, Bulldozer charged forward, leaping into the air. His massive fist came crashing down, slamming the Bone Spike Zombie King to the ground. He pinned it down with one hand, while his other fist repeatedly smashed into its face. Bam, bam, bam. Each punch shook the ground, sending tremors rippling outward. Within moments, the Zombie King's head was driven deep into the earth, cracks spreading like a spiderweb around it. But Bulldozer wasn't satisfied. Grabbing the Zombie King's arm with both hands, he twisted it as if wringing out a wet towel. Crack. With a sickening sound, the Zombie King's entire arm was torn apart, flesh and blood flying everywhere, leaving its white bones exposed. Still think you can stab me? I'll smash your ugly head and snap every last one of your bony spikes. Bulldozer muttered angrily as he continued his assault. The Bone Spike Zombie King wasn't even the absolute ruler of this region, just a mid-level enforcer. Its strength was comparable to Bulldozer's, and even without Ethan's intervention, Laura and the PhD zombie could have easily taken it down. What's more, Ethan's forces had thousands of elite zombies under their command, completely overwhelming the enemy in both numbers and power. The battle was a one-sided massacre, a crushing victory. It didn't take long before the opposing zombies were completely wiped out. Corpses piled up like small mountains, and rivers of blood flowed through the streets. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay, a grotesque scene of carnage. Amid this horrifying tableau, Ethan stood untouched, his white shirt immaculate. Around him, countless zombies gathered, drawn to his presence. Boss, this is all my fault. Bulldozer's heart was heavy with guilt. He had originally come here to hunt and redeem himself, but instead, he'd stumbled into danger and forced Ethan to personally come to his rescue. Not only had he failed to make up for his mistakes, but he'd also caused even more trouble. Ethan, however, shook his head. You did well. Huh. Bulldozer was confused. He didn't know about the X virus, so he couldn't understand why Ethan was praising him. I shouldn't have left the territory on my own. I caused trouble for everyone. It's all my fault, Bulldozer said, lowering his head. It's not your fault, Ethan replied calmly. If anything, it's mine, for having a territory that's too small. Bulldozer was stunned. His eyes grew misty again. Having a leader like Ethan, someone who took responsibility and never blamed his subordinates, was more than he could have ever hoped for. He didn't even know how to repay him. Laura tilted her head, her sharp bone claws still dripping with fresh blood. I think you did pretty well too. Maybe I should save you more often in the future. No thanks. Bulldozer shook his head furiously, like a drumbeat. One rescue was enough. His butt couldn't handle any more. Just then, he looked up and saw a red-eyed crow flapping its wings as it landed nearby. Little Shadow, I owe you one too. If you hadn't called for help in time, I'd be zombie chow by now, Bulldozer said gratefully. The crow fixed its crimson eyes on him, pausing for a moment before replying in a sharp, mocking tone. Big idiot. You're welcome. C-58 trade. Ethan glanced around cautiously. This wasn't his territory, and there was always the chance another zombie king might show up. It wasn't a good idea to linger here. He needed to head back and focus on researching the zombie evolution serum. Let's go. Time to head back and give you guys your shots. Shots. At the mention of the word, Bulldozer winced, instinctively rubbing his backside. He'd developed a psychological trauma from all the injections he'd endured. Back at the tower, naturally, the task of administering the injections fell to the PhD zombie. During the earlier battle, some of the elite zombies had sustained injuries, flesh torn open, black blood oozing out. Since the X virus had regenerative properties, Ethan decided to start with them. It was also a way to reward their contributions in battle. The crate of X virus contained a total of 500 doses. The PhD zombie picked up a syringe, drew the serum into the barrel, and then plunged the needle into the neck of one of the injured zombies. Slowly, the pale blue liquid was injected into its body. Ethan stood by the window on the upper floor, watching the scene unfold below. The results were promising. As soon as the serum entered the zombie's system, its wounds began to heal, visibly, and at an impressive speed. Grr. The zombie let out a low growl, its expression tinged with excitement. The X virus not only healed its injuries but also stimulated its nervous system, enhancing its reflexes. Ethan recalled the experimental reports. It would take 24 hours for the X virus to fully integrate with the zombie's body. By then, the effects would likely be even more pronounced. His elite zombies were already a cut above the rest. While they hadn't yet awakened special abilities, their bodies had undergone significant evolution. Sharp claws, hardened bones, heightened senses, and so on. Now, with the X virus injections, their strength would skyrocket. Each one of them could easily go toe-to-toe with a B-rank human awakener. These 500 zombies were the cream of the crop, the elite of the elite, a veritable zombie army. In Ethan's hands, they were a devastating weapon. Earlier today, Ethan had led his horde into another zombie king's territory, wiping out its underlings and leaving no survivors. He figured the other king wouldn't take this lying down. Zombies were naturally violent and bloodthirsty. Any zombie king who managed to carve out their own domain wasn't someone to be trifled with. Ethan was certain retaliation was coming. Meanwhile, at Genesis Biotech, the atmosphere was tense. They'd just received some bad news. The X virus they'd retrieved from headquarters had gone missing. Nathan, the person in charge, sat in his office, his expression dark and stormy. Explain. What the hell happened? Where's the X virus? Mr. Nathan, according to satellite tracking, the plane crashed in a zombie-controlled area, one of his assistants reported. Fuck. Nathan couldn't hold back his frustration. Dropping an evolution serum into zombie territory. That was like throwing a steak to a pack of wolves. He'd initially hoped they might be able to recover it, but now it seemed like a lost cause. Any word from Maxwell and his team? No. Nothing yet. Honestly, it's not looking good, the assistant replied hesitantly. Nathan mulled it over. Yeah, they were probably done for. A crash in zombie territory. There was no way they'd make it out alive. The bigger problem was that without the X virus to enhance cellular activity, they couldn't proceed with injecting the Q virus to modify bone structures. The entire zombie cultivation program was now in shambles. They'd had a complete plan for creating zombie kings, but now everything was falling apart. Which zombie king's territory did the plane crash in? Nathan asked. Based on the intel we've gathered, the zombie king in that area is extremely powerful. Rough estimates suggest it commands around 30,000 zombies. Its strength is likely on par with the zombie king in the tower region. It's classified as a 5-star zombie nest. Damn it. The mention of the tower region's zombie king only made Nathan angrier. The failure of Operation King Hunt had been a massive embarrassment for the company. One way or another, they'd have to take him down and restore their reputation. But now, with their zombie king cultivation program on hold, perhaps, they could consider collaborating with another zombie king. And the one in the crash zone. It might just be the perfect candidate. It was strong, its territory wasn't far from the tower, and in this post-apocalyptic world, survival of the fittest was the only rule. If you didn't compete, you'd be eliminated. Chances were, it also wanted to expand its domain. With a shared enemy, there was a possibility of becoming temporary allies. I think I should go have a talk with the zombie king in the crash zone, Nathan said, his expression thoughtful. At Nobleman at. His assistant immediately tried to dissuade him. Mr. Nathan, zombies are bloodthirsty by nature. If things go south, they'll kill you without hesitation. Going to negotiate with one, that's way too dangerous. True. Nathan nodded. Who knew what that zombie king was thinking? Did it even like communicating with humans? Negotiating with it would be like bargaining with a tiger, extremely risky. So, someone else should go first to test the waters. Nathan looked up at his assistant. Stay updated with Empire. Then you go talk to it. Wah. The assistant's face instantly froze in disbelief. Night fell, and darkness blanketed the land. The city of the apocalypse was pitch black, so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. A cold night wind swept through, carrying the stench of blood and decay. The occasional roars of zombies echoed through the air. They were either fighting each other or hunting mutated beasts. Killing was everywhere, and danger lurked in every corner. Ethan, however, was holed up at home. One hand held a wine glass, which he occasionally sipped from, the crimson liquid inside glinting faintly. His other hand held a phone, and he was casually replying to messages. The faint glow of the screen illuminated his sharp, handsome features. The message was from Mia. It was short and to the point. Trade. How much do you need? Ethan typed back. Mia was slow at typing. She'd spent 10 years in a mental institution and had never gone to school. 400 pounds of flour. Do you have it? I do. Ethan's spatial storage ring contained supplies worth billions of dollars. A mere 400 pounds of flour was nothing to him. A moment later, Mia replied. All right. 4 crystal cores in exchange. No problem. Ethan had told her before that if she ever needed food, she could trade crystal cores with him. That's how this conversation had come about. They agreed to meet the next morning at a plaza not far from Ethan's territory. The next day, at the shelter, Mia woke up early. She lived in a large, military green tent, a privilege reserved for her as the first awakener, 001. Other survivors weren't so lucky. Some lived in small, cramped tents, while others had nothing but a few sheets of newspaper to sleep on out in the open. Mia stepped outside, the bright morning sun casting a warm glow on her pale face, making her look particularly radiant. Around her, other awakeners were busy with their tasks, some building houses, others digging tunnels. But when they saw Mia, they all greeted her warmly. Mia, is it true what you said last night? That crystal cores can be traded for food? A short, wiry young man darted in front of her, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Mia glanced at him briefly. It's true. I'm heading out now to make the trade. Oh. The young man's curiosity only grew. Crystal cores were valuable, but without food, people would starve. Who was this person willing to trade food for crystal cores? Whoever it was must have a massive stockpile of food, right? The young man's eyes flickered with a calculating glint. He smiled slyly and said, I happen to have a crystal core on me. Can I come with you to make the trade? Mia hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right. The young man's lips curled into a barely noticeable smirk. Thank you so much, he said, his tone polite, but his eyes betrayed a hint of malice. C59A little bonus. The short young man, named Ryan Brooks, was also an awakener. He lived in shelter number 023 and was considered quite strong. But his true identity, he was a member of the Blackhand Legion, an underground organization. His role was to infiltrate the shelter, gather intelligence, and act as a spy. The recent incidents of stolen supplies and kidnapped personnel, Ryan had played no small part in those. Now, hearing that Mia was heading out to trade supplies, he couldn't help but hatch a sinister plan. Of course, he wouldn't dare make a move against Mia herself, she was far too dangerous. But the people she was meeting, that was a different story. Ryan analyzed the situation. He figured the other side was probably just a small group or a minor organization. Soon after, Mia called Sean to join her. When Sean heard they'd be meeting Ethan, he was pretty excited. He even slicked back his greasy hair, convinced he looked incredibly handsome. The three of them left the shelter together, heading toward the designated plaza. During the walk, Ryan deliberately lagged behind, pulling out his phone to secretly message his organization. Guys, looks like we've got a job. And it's a big one. Oh, what kind of big job? What's up? Did the shelter find more supplies? Hey, big job. Or is it a pretty girl? Quote. Several members replied, curious. Ryan continued. The shelter's heading out to trade with someone. The other side has a lot of food, but I don't know who they are yet. Wait, really? If they've got that much food, they must be pretty strong, right? Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Still, we could scope them out first, see how strong they are, and then decide whether to make a move. Sounds good. I'm in. Quote. The Blackhand Legion members quickly began organizing themselves. Ryan also sent them the location of the trade. At the plaza. Mia had chosen the plaza as the meeting spot. It was relatively clear of zombies. The fountain in the center had long since dried up. Its basin was filled with dark, congealed blood and a few skeletal remains, completely rotted away. The railings around the fountain had collapsed, and the entire area was in ruins. Ethan stood at the edge of the fountain, wearing a white shirt. His gaze was fixed on the basin, as if he were admiring the fountain from the past, back when it was still flowing with water. The plaza wasn't far from Ethan's home. Before the apocalypse, he used to take evening strolls here. The plaza had been lively back then, with vendors selling balloons and children's toys. The air had been filled with the laughter of kids. Now, it was nothing but silence and death. Ethan turned around, scanning his surroundings. The towering buildings nearby were either partially collapsed or riddled with cracks. Broken windows revealed dark, gaping holes. Occasionally, the guttural growls of zombies echoed from within. At that moment, 3 figures appeared on the street between 2 crumbling buildings: Mia, Sean, and Ryan. Ryan craned his neck, squinting at the plaza. Sure enough, there was someone standing there. No way. Just one person. In a world without order, anyone trading alone was practically asking to be robbed or killed. Unless their companions were hiding nearby. Ryan glanced around, scanning the area, but he couldn't find any signs of others lying in wait. You're here. As Mia approached, Ethan was the first to greet her. Mia nodded slightly. Did you bring the goods? I did. With a casual wave of his hand, Ethan summoned 4 large bags of white flour out of thin air. Each bag weighed 100 pounds, totaling 400 pounds. Enjoy new tales from Empire. Mia stepped forward, opened one of the bags, and pinched a small amount of flour between her fingers. She brought it to her nose and sniffed. Not bad. Pretty pure. Sean, standing nearby, rolled his eyes. What is this? A movie scene? You two rehearsing or something? Meanwhile, Ryan was carefully observing Ethan's every move. The way Ethan had summoned the flour out of nowhere had startled him. Could he be a spatial type awakener? Ryan silently analyzed. Spatial abilities were notoriously powerful, but not invincible. At nobleman at. He tilted his head slightly and spotted a few figures hidden in a distant building, watching the scene unfold. The Blackhand Legion members were in position. Haha, buddy, are you really here to trade all by yourself? Ryan asked, feigning casual curiosity to confirm his suspicions. Ethan turned his gaze toward him. Yeah, just me. For some reason, the moment Ethan's eyes locked onto him, Ryan felt his heart skip a beat. A strange sense of unease crept over him, and he instinctively took half a step back. What's going on? Ryan couldn't figure it out, but he forced himself to stay calm and probe further. Do you have any more food? I'd like to trade for some too. Nope. Ethan's tone was flat. What? None left. Ryan was surprised but quickly reasoned that Ethan was lying. If he only had 400 pounds of flour, there was no way he'd trade it for crystal cores. He's being cautious, Ryan thought. He's clearly guarding against me. But that caution might stem from insecurity. If Ethan were truly strong, he wouldn't need to be so wary. Ryan, being a skilled spy, was adept at reading people. Through subtle questioning and careful analysis, he concluded that Ethan might be someone they could take down. What Ryan didn't know was that Ethan's sharp senses had already picked up on the presence of humans hiding in the nearby building. He could smell them. And he could tell that Ryan harbored ill intentions. Sean, oblivious to the tension, grinned and asked, Ethan, it's been a while. How've you been? Not great. Pretty boring. Honestly, Ethan replied casually. Even Sean, as dense as he was, didn't believe that. Boring. With all that food. Man, I'd love to be that bored. Mia stepped forward and handed Ethan 4 crystal cores. If you're free, we could team up to hunt some zombies and gather more crystal cores. You probably know some good targets, right? Not at the moment, but I might have some soon, Ethan said thoughtfully. Mia nodded. All right, let me know when you do. Sure. If you find any good targets, feel free to call me too. No problem. The group exchanged a few more words before wrapping up the conversation. Even though the plaza was free of zombies for now, it was still the apocalypse. Danger could appear at any moment, so it wasn't wise to linger. They quickly parted ways. On the way back, Mia and Sean each carried 2 bags of flour. Despite the combined weight of 200 pounds, they carried them effortlessly. Haha, we're finally gonna have fresh bread again, Sean said, practically drooling at the thought. Ryan, however, grew increasingly quiet. After walking for a while, he suddenly stopped. Hey, I didn't manage to trade for any food. I'm gonna check the area and see if I can scavenge some supplies. You two go on ahead. Alright, go ahead, Mia said with a nod. Don't worry, I'll head back to the shelter soon, Ryan said with a faint smile before turning and disappearing into the ruins of the nearby buildings. Sean, still daydreaming about bread, wiped the drool from his mouth. But then a thought struck him. Wait a second. In the shelter, 1 crystal core is worth a whole box of instant noodles. But with Ethan, it's worth 100 pounds of flour. Isn't he losing out? Mia glanced at him, her expression calm but knowing. Don't worry, he's not losing out. I even threw in a little bonus for him. She turned her head slightly, her perfect profile catching the light. Her bright eyes lingered on the direction Ryan had disappeared into, her expression unreadable. C-60 Megalodon. Ethan was walking toward the building. He could already sense it. 4 human presences closing in behind him. They were leaping across the rooftops on either side, stealthily tracking him. Stop right there. Suddenly, someone landed behind Ethan, one hand on the ground to steady himself as he barked out the command. Ethan stopped in his tracks and turned around. It was Ryan. He straightened up, dusting off his hands. The expression on his face was completely different from before. Gone was the warm, friendly smile, replaced by a cold, sinister smirk, as if he were a completely different person. If you won't trade food with me, don't blame me for what happens next. Ryan's smirk deepened as he continued, oh, and by the way, I should probably mention, I'm with the Blackhand Legion. Shish, shish, shish. The other 3 dropped down from the rooftops, landing to Ethan's left, right, and behind him. The 4 of them formed a tight circle, trapping him in the middle. Spatial abilities, huh, pretty rare. Don't let him get away, said a burly man with a booming voice. Ethan glanced at the 4 of them but stayed silent. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue. Ha ha ha, sneered a wiry man with a sly grin. The Blackhand Legion had a reputation for being ruthless. To ordinary people, they were terrifying, completely lawless and willing to do whatever they pleased. Ryan studied Ethan carefully. A spatial awakener. Huh. You've got potential. Tell you what. Hand over all your food, and maybe, just maybe, I'll consider letting you join us. Continue your journey on Empire. No need, Ethan finally spoke. Oh, Ryan raised an eyebrow. Ethan didn't look scared at all. So, you're planning to fight back, huh? Don't think that just because you've got spatial abilities, we can't deal with you. Do you know why I didn't trade food with you? Ethan asked, his tone calm. What? Ryan frowned, confused. The burly man was already losing his patience. Enough talk. Let's just take him down before something goes wrong. Because, Ethan said, his voice suddenly cold, you're the food. The 4 of them froze, their expressions shifting. What the hell was he talking about? His words didn't make any sense. Something about him felt off. But they didn't have to wonder for long. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, like the rumble of 1,000 charging horses. The once empty street started to fill with movement, zombies. They appeared out of nowhere, moving with terrifying speed and agility, climbing down walls, leaping from rooftops, swarming toward them. What the hell? One of the zombies, Laura, flickered like a shadow and suddenly appeared right in front of them. Another, Bulldozer, moved like a massive gorilla, bounding across the rooftops before landing with a deafening crash on a wrecked car, smashing it to pieces. Zombie horde. Ryan's face went pale as he realized what was happening. His eyes widened in shock. Where the hell did all these zombies come from? Fall back, he shouted, panic setting in. The 4 of them tried to retreat the way they came, but it was too late. A swarm of zombies, led by a mutated PhD zombie, had already cut off their escape route. Everywhere they looked, there were zombies. Some crouched on rooftops, others clung to walls, their glowing eyes filled with hunger. Their guttural growls and snarls echoed through the street, surrounding the group completely. This can't be happening, Ryan stammered, his voice trembling. He instinctively turned to look back at Ethan. Ethan stood there, calm and unmoving, with a sea of zombies behind him. His cold, emotionless gaze locked onto Ryan. Why you're the zombie king. Ryan's voice cracked as the realization hit him like a thunderbolt. The four of them were paralyzed with fear, their hearts pounding in their chests. This is the big catch you were talking about. The burly man roared, his face twisted in rage and terror. This isn't a fish, it's a goddamn megalodon. Ryan was utterly dumbfounded. I didn't know. He couldn't wrap his head around it. The person Sean and Mia had traded food with turned out to be the zombie king. Damn it. A fool and a lunatic. Of course, they'd screw things up. The zombie horde surrounded the four of them, their growls echoing like a pack of ravenous wolves ready to tear their prey apart. Among them, Bulldozer was the most excited. His small eyes squinted with glee, thinking how the boss always brought back food whenever he went out. Heh, this is great. Ryan, seeing the zombies closing in, panicked. As the realization of his impending death sank in, he desperately begged Ethan for mercy. Don't kill me. I can join you. Sure, Ethan said with a calm nod. You're about to become one with them. As soon as the words left his mouth, the horde roared and surged forward. These weren't ordinary zombies. They were elite ones enhanced with the X virus. Before Ryan and the others could even activate their Awakener abilities, they were tackled to the ground. Sharp teeth tore into flesh, and blood splattered everywhere. Ryan and his group screamed in agony, their cries echoing through the streets. But it didn't last long. Soon, their voices were drowned out by the frenzy of the zombie horde. While the horde feasted on the four, far off in the distance, a helicopter roared through the sky. Inside sat a young man, his face pale, and his hands trembling. It was none other than Justin Parker, Nathan's assistant. He had been sent by his boss to negotiate with the zombie king. Damn that boss. Damn these greedy capitalists, Justin muttered under his breath, his anxiety growing with every passing second. He stared out the window, feeling like a prisoner being marched to the gallows. Are we there yet? He asked nervously. Almost. Justin. Just past that building up ahead, replied the pilot, Mark. Oh. Justin nodded, then hesitated. How about we circle around a few more times? Mark. The helicopter was empty except for the two of them. After all, if the negotiation succeeded, great. But if it failed, bringing more people would just mean more food for the zombies. At Novelban at. The helicopter's rotors thundered as they flew over the rooftops, officially entering the zombie king's territory, his infamous 5-star zombie nest. Justin's palms were drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced down through the window. Below, countless zombies were stirred into a frenzy by the sound of the helicopter. Like rabid dogs, they sprinted through the streets, gathering in greater and greater numbers, snarling and chasing after the noise. Justin, we're here. Should we land? Mark asked. Land my ass. Are you trying to get us killed? Justin snapped. If they landed now, it would be a death sentence. Instead, Justin grabbed the microphone attached to the helicopter's loudspeaker and shouted, Hello. Hello. I'm from Genesis Biotech. I'm here on behalf of the company to negotiate with your boss. Hello. Can you hear me? I'm from Genesis Biotech. His voice echoed across the city, repeating several times. Justin kept his eyes glued to the scene below. After a moment, he noticed something strange. The zombies suddenly stopped. Their growls faded, and they began dispersing, retreating into the shadows. It worked. Justin muttered in disbelief. Justin, what if they're just tricking us into landing so they can eat us? Mark asked nervously. Shut up. Justin barked. The helicopter slowly descended, landing in an open plaza. Justin and Mark stepped out cautiously, glancing around. To their surprise, there weren't any zombies nearby. But standing in front of them was a single figure. It was massive, easily 6 feet tall, with rolls of fat covering its body. It looked like a sumo wrestler straight out of a video game, resembling E. Honda. Its sharp fangs gleamed in its mouth, and its small, beady eyes glinted with malice. C61 the Serpent Eye Zombie King. The zombie was ridiculously fat. Its arms and legs were layered with rolls of fat, stacked one on top of the other, making it look just like the Michelin Man from those tire commercials. Let's just call him Michelin for now. Justin quickly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. We're here to talk about a deal. If it works out, I promise you'll get plenty of benefits. Added Nobleman at. Benefits. Are benefits something you can eat? Michelin tilted his head, his expression blank. Clearly, he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. With intelligence like that, there was no way he could be the ruler of the 5-star zombie nest. Michelin was just a grunt. A brute force tank, the zombie equivalent of a bulldozer from Ethan's territory. Justin froze for a moment, realizing this too. So, he wasn't the one in charge of the 5-star zombie nest. Humans, follow me, Michelin said in a deep, rumbling voice. Then he turned and started walking ahead. With every step, his rolls of fat jiggled and wobbled like jelly. Justin and Mark exchanged a glance before quickly following behind him. The whole way, the two of them were on edge, their nerves stretched thin. Even though the zombie hadn't shown any signs of hostility, zombies were unpredictable and violent by nature. Who knew if, in the next second, it might decide to rip them apart and drink their blood? Thankfully, they didn't encounter any other zombies along the way. But the air grew colder and colder, and a metallic stench lingered in their noses. On the trees lining the street, something seemed to be writhing. Justin squinted to get a better look, and when he realized what it was, he gasped sharply. Thick, mottled pythons, as wide as a person's arm, were coiled around the branches, flicking their tongues and bearing razor-sharp fangs. Just looking at them sent shivers down his spine. Damn, there are so many snakes, Justin muttered, noticing that nearly every tree had one, or several. Overwhelmed with fear, he decided to just look away. Out of sight, out of mind. Still, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. The fact that there were so many snakes in the heart of the 5-star zombie nest made him suspect that the zombie king here had some kind of strange power. It might even be a phantom infected. After what felt like an eternity, they finally arrived in front of a building. The glass doors were shattered, and the metal doorframe was wrapped in several massive pythons. Their bodies were as thick as a grown man's waist, their heads as large as lanterns, and their glowing yellow eyes radiated malice. The giant snakes raised their heads, sizing up the guests who had arrived. Their long tongues flicked in and out, as if they were ready to strike at any moment. What the hell is this? A snake pit, Justin muttered, his skin crawling. Michelin, however, remained polite. Please, come in. Justin's face darkened. His fear was palpable, but he couldn't help muttering under his breath, damn it, cursed boss, cursed corporate greed. Justin, are you scared? Mark asked in a trembling voice, hoping for some reassurance. Gulp. Justin swallowed hard, forcing himself to act tough. Scared? Of what? We're already here. No turning back now. Pull yourself together. We're representing the company's reputation. Explore more at Empire. Oh. Mark wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. The two of them cautiously approached the door. Thankfully, as they passed the giant pythons, the snakes didn't attack. They simply turned their heads to follow the pair with their unblinking eyes, watching as they entered the building. Phew. Justin was just about to let out a sigh of relief when the sight inside the building made his hair stand on end. His breath caught in his throat, and his entire body began to tremble uncontrollably. The entire lobby was filled with snakes. They were everywhere, coiled together, slithering over one another, writhing in massive, tangled piles. The sheer number of them was enough to make anyone's skin crawl. The air was thick with the stench of blood and decay, so strong it made Justin gag. Ugh! Justin fought the urge to vomit, forcing it back down. His fear reached its peak. His whole body shook like a leaf, and he felt a pressure in his bladder, as if he might wet himself at any moment. Mark, equally terrified, didn't want to linger in this place any longer. Seeing Justin frozen in place, he urged him forward. Justin, hurry up. Why you're gonna have to help me walk? Justin stammered, his legs like jelly. Mark was speechless but had no choice. The two of them leaned on each other for support, carefully stepping over the snakes as they made their way through the lobby. Their hearts were pounding so hard it felt like they might burst out of their chests. Justin couldn't help but think that, aside from his boss's schemes, this was the most terrifying ordeal of his life. Time seemed to lose all meaning. It felt like both a single second and an eternity had passed as they made their way forward. Finally, they made it through the snake pit and entered the inner hall. Roar. The familiar sound of zombie growls echoed around them. One terrifying face after another emerged from the shadows. These weren't ordinary zombies. They were elite ones, the equivalent of a personal guard. At the forefront of this group sat a towering figure. His skin was deathly pale, almost ash white, but it showed no signs of decay. His facial features were surprisingly handsome, though the area around his eyes was crisscrossed with bulging black veins, giving him a sinister and unsettling appearance. But the most terrifying thing about him was his eyes. They were a piercing yellow, with slit-like pupils, serpent eyes, identical to the snakes outside. Hiss! Justin felt a chill run down his spine. His body froze, and a sudden warmth spread in his pants. He had wet himself out of sheer terror. Master, this human is kind of cute, said a woman standing beside the serpent eye zombie king. She wasn't fully human, though. Her upper body was that of a woman, but her lower half was a grotesque spider's abdomen, supported by 8 razor-sharp legs that gleamed like steel blades. She was a fusion of a zombie and a giant tarantula, her bloated abdomen twitching slightly as she spoke. The woman licked the corner of her mouth with a long, slimy tongue, her gaze lingering on Justin with a disturbing curiosity. Damn it! Justin cursed silently, frozen in place, not daring to move a muscle. The serpent eye zombie king finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, like the sound of rusted metal scraping together. Come, sit. Okay. Justin stammered, hesitating for a moment before forcing himself to move. His legs felt like jelly as he shuffled forward, and when he reached the chair, he noticed that it, too, was surrounded by snakes. Once again, he cursed inwardly. Damn boss. Damn corporate greed. Sending me to negotiate with a zombie king. This is worse than death. Suppressing his disgust and fear, Justin reluctantly sat down. Almost immediately, the snakes coiled around his legs, their cold, scaly bodies pressing against his skin. It felt like they could bite him at any moment and end his life. Justin's mind went blank. Out of habit, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cigarette. His hands were trembling so badly, though, that it took him several tries to get it into his mouth. When he finally managed, he fumbled with his lighter, his shaking hands making it impossible to strike a flame. He tried again and again, but the lighter kept going out. The serpent eye zombie king watched him for a moment, then reached out and took the lighter from Justin's hand. With a simple flick, the flame came to life. Thank you, Justin stammered, taking a deep drag from the cigarette. The rush of nicotine helped calm his nerves, if only slightly. So, what do you want to talk about? The serpent eye zombie king asked, his tone cold and indifferent. Well, Justin hesitated, trying to steady his voice. We're from Genesis Biotech. A while back, one of our shipments, some experimental serums, crashed in your territory. Do you still have it? The serpent eye zombie king nodded at first, but then his expression darkened. Yes, it crashed here. But, his voice grew colder. The zombie king from the Skyscraper district stole it. He killed one of my best lieutenants and over 1,000 of my men. What? Him again? Justin muttered, frowning as he processed this new information. Things weren't going as he had expected. Looks like the boss's analysis was wrong. What did you just say? The serpent eye zombie king asked, his tone sharp. Nothing. Nothing at all. Justin quickly waved his hands, his nerves getting the better of him. His hands trembled even more violently now. C-62 all right. Just hang in there. I mean, that zombie king is just too much. He dared to kill your men. We should team up and wipe them out completely. Justin explained hastily, trying to justify himself. The serpent eye zombie king had already been thinking along those lines. Someone coming into his territory to kill and loot, then leaving as if nothing happened. That was just plain arrogant. But previously, he hadn't acted recklessly because he didn't know enough about the other side's situation. Do you know anything about their zombie nest? Yes, I do. Justin nodded repeatedly and continued. According to the intel my company gathered, he commands a horde of 10,000 zombies, with 2,000 elite troops. And now, with the addition of the X-virus, their numbers have increased by at least 500. Those terrifying zombies have eaten a lot of our people. It started with 200 at the prison, another 200 at the mall, and then the Operation King Hunt Squad, including 500 armed personnel. Because of that, their evolution level is insanely high. In fact, most of the city's major battles were led by him. You could say he's undefeated and unstoppable. Oh, the serpent eye zombie king nodded, starting to piece things together. So, what you're saying is, you've lost to him 3 times in a row. Technically, yes, Justin admitted awkwardly. But that's only because they ambushed us. During the Operation King Hunt mission, we ran into the red-faced zombie king first, and he ended up reaping all the benefits. The Serpent Eye Zombie King knew about the red-faced Zombie King. In fact, they'd even crossed paths before. He had originally planned to recruit him, but Ethan had killed him and taken over his territory instead. Master, the fact that red-faced got hunted down just proves how stupid he was, said the spider zombie woman arrogantly from the side. She herself had once been a powerful ruler, stronger than the red-faced Zombie King. But later, she was subdued by the Serpent Eye Zombie King, and their forces had merged into one. Now, they commanded a total of 30,000 zombies, including a significant number of elite troops. Even though they have a lot of elite zombies, we can make up for it with sheer numbers. Besides, I've got my little treasures. The Serpent Eye Zombie King reached down to stroke the snake coiled beneath his chair. The snake flicked its crimson tongue and hissed, its demeanor radiating excitement. Justin wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, thinking to himself, this guy is seriously twisted. But then, something suddenly came to mind. Oh, right, that Zombie King is often surrounded by a flock of crows. They're pretty strong too, so we can't underestimate them. The crows flying over the city. The spider zombie woman's predatory eyes gleamed, and a wicked smile crept across her lips. As a hybrid of a human and a giant tarantula, she was practically a natural predator of all birds. They scatter the moment they see me. Leave them to me. All right. The Serpent Eye Zombie King nodded, calculating his odds. From the looks of it, victory was almost guaranteed. And with Genesis Biotech backing him, there was no reason he could lose. In fact, he was already planning to turn on Genesis Biotech after using them. Once they were out of the picture, he would become the undisputed ruler of the central region. Looks like it's time to expand my territory. At Nobleman at. Meanwhile, on the other side, Ethan's underlings were feasting on the 4 members of the Blackhand Legion. One zombie gnawed on an arm, another on a leg, and 2 others fought over a head, tearing into it together. This is way too little meat. Ethan frowned, realizing it wasn't nearly enough to feed his men. His 500 elite zombies had evolved to such a high degree that their appetites had grown significantly. The meat from just 4 people. It wasn't even enough to fill their teeth. Why didn't Ryan bring more people? Ethan felt a pang of regret. As his gaze swept the area, he noticed a phone lying on the ground. Its screen was lit up, displaying messages from a group chat. The phone had fallen from Ryan's pocket. If he won't call for reinforcements, I'll do it for him. Read exclusive content at Empire. Ethan picked up the phone and started scrolling through the messages. Sure enough, it was a group chat for members of the Blackhand Legion, who were actively discussing things. Hey guys, how's it going today? Anyone find anything interesting? Yeah, I found a bunch of survivors out in the eastern suburbs. So much fun. Ha 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 tilde. The city's too densely populated. Most people have already turned into zombies. But if you head out to the suburbs or the countryside, you might still find some living ones. Any hot guys? Send me a few. They need to be 6 feet 7 inches, have abs, and, be well endowed. What the hell? You should have told me earlier. I already killed all the men. Want them dead? Just cut off their dicks and bring them back. I'm collecting 1,000 of them, and I'm only halfway there. No. I'm not touching that. You come here and do it yourself. Quote. Before the apocalypse, the Blackhand Legion had already been active on the dark web. They were known for their bloodlust, cruelty, and twisted fetishes. They often killed people in horrifying ways just for fun, recording videos to share with others. Ethan read through their chat, a faint smirk curling at the corner of his lips. These little guys, they're kind of adorable. From the chat logs, Ethan learned that there was a small Blackhand Legion outpost not far from his location. It was in an underground mall, stocked with plenty of supplies. The outpost housed over 20 Blackhand Legion members, who were living like kings. They had over 100 survivors imprisoned there, treating them as livestock, and were enjoying a life of luxury and indulgence. Living the good life. Huh. Ethan muttered to himself. He couldn't stand seeing others doing well, so he decided to take his men and raid their outpost. But just as he was about to act, a private message popped up on Ryan Brooks's phone. It was a distress signal. Bro, I ran into something near the museum. I'm in serious danger right now. You've got to come save me. Bring people from the shelter if you have to. Just tell them I'm a regular survivor. Ethan glanced at the sender's name, Jason Brooks. The connection to Ryan was obvious. Something near the museum. Ethan thought for a moment. The museum wasn't in his territory, but it wasn't far either. How could there be something like that near my territory? What did you see? Ethan replied. I don't know. It's something that comes and goes like a ghost. It's almost invisible, like it can blend into the surroundings. It's already killed 4 of us. Invisible. Comes and goes like a ghost. Ethan frowned. He had never encountered anything like that near his territory. Could it have wandered in from somewhere else? Maybe I should check it out. Can't leave something like that lurking around. Bro, please hurry. I feel like it's getting closer to me. I don't even know. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Jason's messages became increasingly frantic. He was clearly terrified, on the verge of a complete breakdown. Whatever he had encountered must have been truly horrifying. All right, just hang in there. Ethan sent a message of encouragement, though what he really meant was, don't die yet. Wait until I get there. Then you can die. I am coming to save you right now. C63, that's a window. Ethan turned to Bulldozer and the others, giving them a quick order. I'm heading out for a bit. Keep an eye on things here. Things might get a little chaotic soon. Don't worry, boss, Bulldozer replied with a goofy grin. The next moment, they watched as Ethan's figure gradually disappeared into the distance, vanishing around the corner of the street. Bulldozer stared in the direction Ethan had gone, a hint of admiration in his eyes. The boss had just brought back a load of food, and now he was heading out again to hunt. His heart swelled with gratitude. Man, he's really something else. ... After leaving the territory, Ethan activated his stealth mode. Silent and unseen, he moved like a ghost through the wrecked streets, not disturbing so much as a blade of grass. A short while later, he arrived at the museum district. Something felt off. He could sense it. A cold wind swept through, carrying the faint metallic tang of blood. Above the museum, dark clouds loomed, black as ink, pressing so low they seemed to almost crush the roof. The oppressive atmosphere was suffocating. Boom. Lightning streaked across the sky, illuminating the clouds as thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind picked up, howling like a chorus of wailing spirits. Dust and debris swirled through the air, plastic bags fluttering like restless ghosts. Ethan's sharp eyes locked onto the museum ahead. The massive building loomed like a slumbering beast. Bloodstains were splattered across the ground outside, and the corpses of zombies lay scattered around. The eerie silence was almost deafening, a stillness that felt like death itself. But Ethan could sense it. 3 humans were still alive inside. They were hiding, their fear practically radiating off them. As for what was threatening them, Ethan couldn't quite pinpoint it. That alone was unsettling. What the hell is it? He muttered to himself. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, activating his domain of the dead ability to phase straight through the museum walls. Inside, the dim light made the atmosphere even more oppressive. Occasionally, a flash of lightning would illuminate the space, casting fleeting shadows across the room. Ethan scanned his surroundings. The place was a mess. Shattered glass, dried blood, and decayed corpses reduced to little more than skeletons. These were the remnants of the chaos from the early days of the apocalypse. The museum had been packed with people back then, making it one of the hardest hit areas. The bloody handprints smeared across the walls told a story of desperation and terror. Ethan pressed on, moving toward the faint traces of life he could sense. It didn't take long. In a dimly lit hallway, 3 figures came into view, panting heavily as they ran. Hurry up. I think it's catching up to us. One of them shouted. Jason, I swear it's just toying with us, another said, his face tense. Like a cat playing with a mouse. Jason tried to reassure them. Don't worry. My brother said to hold on. He's coming to save us. When's your brother Ryan getting here? The third person asked, their voice trembling. Probably soon, I think. Jason replied, clinging to the sliver of hope that had kept him going this far. What Jason didn't know, though, was that Ryan was gone. His body had been torn apart, his remains now fused with the very zombies they were running from. The 3 of them reached the end of the hallway. Ahead was a door leading into a large room. With no other options, they pushed it open and rushed inside. The room was massive, at least 2,000 square feet, but it felt eerily empty. Paintings hung on the walls, though many had fallen to the floor. Their frames were shattered, glass shards scattered everywhere, glinting faintly in the dim light. No way out, a dark-skinned young man exclaimed, his voice tinged with panic. Shish. Jason quickly raised a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. Don't make a sound. Let's hide. Got it. The two companions nodded and huddled into a corner, pressing their backs against the wall. The solid surface gave them a false sense of security, as if it could shield them from whatever was out there. What they didn't know was that Ethan was already there, concealed within the very wall behind them, silently observing the trio. But he wasn't planning to act just yet. Stay updated through Empire. Killing them would be effortless, but that wasn't his priority. The real concern was the thing lurking in the museum. And now, Ethan could feel it. Ever since the three had entered this empty room, a faint presence had begun to approach. It was elusive, almost intangible, as if it wasn't entirely of this world. Could it really be a ghost? In the apocalypse, there had been countless inexplicable phenomena, but Ethan had never encountered an actual spirit. Crack. A sudden flash of lightning split the sky, its blinding light flooding the room for a brief moment. Jason's unease deepened. His instincts screamed that death was closing in. He pulled out his phone and frantically sent another message. Bro, where are you? I'm out of options here. But no reply came. Fuck. Jason cursed under his breath, his frustration boiling over. Still, he trusted his brother. They had relied on each other since they were kids. Ryan would come for him. He had to. Suddenly, a strange sensation crept over him, like a cold hand gripping his heart. Jason's eyes darted to the paintings on the walls. His gaze shifted rapidly from one to the next until it landed on something that made his stomach drop. One painting stood out, a portrait of a black figure. Its face was pitch black, like coal, with no discernible features. Only its mouth, filled with sharp fangs, and its eyes, radiating a menacing aura, were visible. It looked like a demon straight out of hell. Hey, you two, look at that painting. Doesn't it seem off? Jason whispered urgently, nudging his companions. Huh, at it Nobleman at. The two looked at him in confusion before following his gaze. Which one are you talking about? The one in the middle. I don't see anything weird, one of them said, frowning. Yeah, me neither, the other added, shaking his head. Jason's frustration flared. Are you blind? It's right. He stopped mid-sentence, his words catching in his throat. The painting was gone. His eyes widened in disbelief. The portrait he had just seen had vanished. One of his companions spoke hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. Jason. The middle one. That's a window. Crack. Another bolt of lightning lit up the room, illuminating everything in stark detail. Jason's heart nearly stopped. Where the painting had been, there was indeed a window. And something had been looking at him through it. Holy shit. A wave of terror surged through him, sending chills racing up his spine. His entire body broke out in goosebumps as a cold sweat drenched him. I saw it. I saw it. Run. Jason bolted, sprinting back toward the hallway like a man possessed. Huh, saw what? His two companions were bewildered, but seeing Jason's panic, they didn't dare stay behind. They scrambled after him, their footsteps echoing in the vast, empty room. But then, a shadow slipped through the crack in the window. It moved, like liquid darkness, merging seamlessly with the surrounding gloom. It was no longer just a shadow, it was a predator, something born of nightmares. The shadow darted forward, its speed inhuman, closing the distance in an instant. Before they could react, it reached the last person in the group. Schlunk. A clawed hand, wreathed in black flames, pierced through the man's back. Warm blood sprayed out, splattering across Jason and the other companions' necks and hair. Ah! The two froze in terror, their bodies trembling as they turned to look. Behind them stood a towering figure cloaked in darkness. Its clawed hand was embedded in their friend's back, lifting him off the ground like a ragdoll. The victim wasn't dead yet. His legs kicked weakly, his bloodshot eyes bulging as he struggled to speak. Help! Me. C64 wanna bet. What the hell is that thing? Ryan and Jason were utterly horrified. The shadowy figure tossed the corpse aside, then extended a dark purple tongue to lick the crimson blood off its claws. Its bloodlust was palpable. It was a B+ class zombie king, with the awakened ability, Shadow Veil, which allowed it to hide in shadows and move through tiny gaps like window cracks, door crevices, or even fissures in walls. While in its Shadow Veil state, it could also evade detection, making its ability particularly eerie and unpredictable. Not bad. Ethan silently mused to himself. Killing it to harvest its crystal core seemed like a waste. It might be better to recruit it as a subordinate. After all, manpower was in short supply these days. With that thought, Ethan stepped out from the wall, his figure slowly materializing. Huh. The moment Ethan appeared, the shadowy figure immediately sensed his presence. It whipped its head around, its fierce eyes locking onto him. Although its face was as black as charred coal, making its expression unreadable, the shock it felt was unmistakable. Ryan and Jason, on the other hand, were completely dumbfounded. They had just witnessed Ethan materialize out of thin air, and their minds were reeling. What the hell is going on today? First monsters, now this guy just pops out of nowhere. The shadowy figure grew visibly wary. Ignoring Ryan and Jason entirely, it focused all its attention on Ethan. A deep sense of unease crept into its mind, a primal instinct warning it that this man was dangerous. Who are you? I'm the zombie king of this building. You have two choices. Submit to me or face the consequences, Ethan said bluntly. The shadow shook its head. I know you're strong, but I will never submit to anyone. Oh, Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this little shadow's defiance. It seemed like this one had some backbone. In truth, the shadow was also a zombie king, ruling over a territory on the far side of Serpent Eye's domain. It had once commanded over 10,000 subordinates, but after several clashes with Serpent Eye, its forces had dwindled to just 5,000. Serpent Eye had also tried to recruit the shadow, but it had refused to yield, leading to a bitter conflict between the two. The shadow was no match for Serpent Eye and had suffered defeat after defeat. At one point, it was even driven out of its territory entirely. However, through guerrilla tactics and sheer determination, it managed to reclaim half of its land with its remaining forces. Added Nobleman at. Its Shadow Veil ability made it incredibly hard to kill, and Serpent Eye eventually gave up trying. But life in its diminished territory was tough. Other zombies could at least scavenge rats or insects for food when supplies ran low. The Shadow's territory, however, was so small that even rats and bugs were scarce. Catching 3 flies was considered a feast. So, it had no choice but to rely on its Shadow Veil ability to roam far and wide in search of prey. If I want to leave, there's no way you can stop me, the shadow said confidently. Wanna bet? Ethan asked with a smirk. Without another word, the shadow's body began to blur, as if engulfed in black flames. Its form dissolved into a liquid-like state, slipping into its shadow veil mode. Like a pool of dark fluid, it moved swiftly across the ground, darting into a nearby wall crack. At the same time, Ethan's figure vanished from where he stood. The shadow moved silently, like a ghost, slipping through walls, door cracks, and window gaps. It twisted and turned through the building, moving so erratically that even it began to lose track of its direction. Finally, it emerged in a room, stepping out of its shadow veil state. Its charred body rose from the ground, solidifying once more. Phew. The shadow glanced back in the direction it had come from. Seeing no sign of pursuit, it let out a long sigh of relief. It had heard of Ethan before, rumors of how he had killed Bone Spike, one of Serpent Eye's top lieutenants. His strength was no joke. Damn it, I finally found some prey, and now it's gone. My brothers back home are still waiting for food. Gone. I wouldn't say that. Stay connected via Empire. Suddenly, a voice rang out behind the shadow. Huh. The shadow froze in shock and spun around, only to see Ethan standing there. His tall, lean figure was dressed in a spotless white shirt, and a faint smile played on his lips. How did you get here? I followed you, of course, Ethan replied casually, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The shadow was stunned. It hadn't sensed anyone following it earlier, yet here Ethan was, appearing out of thin air. It was downright eerie. How is this possible? Could it be an illusion? The shadow tried to make sense of the situation, but its instincts screamed danger. Without hesitation, its body began to blur and dissolve again, slipping back into its shadow veil state to escape. But just as it was about to flee, Ethan's eyes flashed with a crimson glow. In an instant, a powerful domain of the dead unfolded around him. The oppressive force surged forward like a tidal wave, engulfing the shadow completely. Damn it! The shadow's liquid-like form rippled violently under the crushing pressure, as if it were carrying the weight of a mountain. It couldn't move. Ethan's voice rang out, calm but commanding. Submit. Never. The shadow growled through gritted teeth, its defiance unshaken. I'd rather die than bow to anyone. Oh. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. Then, to the shadow's surprise, he suddenly withdrew the domain of the dead. The suffocating pressure vanished in an instant, and the terrifying aura around Ethan dissipated, leaving him looking calm and unbothered once more. The dimly lit room fell silent again, the tension easing. Then, with a casual wave of his hand, Ethan pulled out half a slab of beef from his spatial storage ring. If intimidation didn't work, maybe temptation would. How about this? Does this change your mind? The shadow froze, its gaze locked onto the beef. In the apocalypse, beef was an incredibly rare delicacy. For zombies, it was even better than human flesh, more flavorful and packed with energy. In the shadow's barren territory, even rats and bugs were hard to come by. Now, faced with a slab of fresh, juicy beef, it couldn't resist. Unbidden, tears of hunger and longing dripped from the corners of its mouth. Ethan chuckled softly at the sight and tossed the beef over. No need to answer right away. Take this back with you and think it over. Follow me, and there'll be plenty more. Where that came from. All right. Fine. The shadow picked up the beef and couldn't help but take a huge bite. Delicious. Absolutely delicious. Without another word, it turned and left, clutching the beef tightly. Meanwhile, back in the museum, two humans were still alive, Jason and his companion. Both were trembling with fear after witnessing the terrifying zombies earlier. Jason, we need to get out of here, now. Jason's companion urged him, desperate to escape while Ethan and the shadow were gone. Yeah, Jason nodded, his legs shaking as he started running down the long hallway. But deep down, he knew the truth. After seeing the zombies' horrifying abilities, their chances of escape were slim. His only hope was to contact his brother, Ryan. As they ran, Jason pulled out his phone and frantically sent messages to Ryan, praying for a miracle. Their hurried footsteps echoed through the empty corridor as they sprinted toward the museum's main entrance. The closer they got, the more it felt like salvation was within reach. If they could just make it outside, maybe, just maybe, they'd have a chance. But then, a tall figure slowly materialized in front of the entrance. Ethan's cold, piercing gaze fell on them. Stop! Jason's companion screamed in terror, and both of them skidded to a halt. He was here. The overwhelming fear returned, suffocating them. Death loomed closer with every passing second. Jason's hands trembled as he glanced down at his phone, hoping for a reply from his brother. But there was nothing. Don't bother. Ethan's voice broke the silence as he casually tossed something toward Jason. It landed with a clatter at his feet. A phone. The screen was still lit, displaying all the frantic messages Jason had sent. Jason's eyes widened in horror. That's my brother's phone. A terrible realization dawned on him. What did you do to him? Where's my brother? Ethan's smile was cold and unfeeling. Your brother. Oh, he's around, in pieces. Scattered everywhere. C65. There are places where sunlight doesn't reach. Jason understood what Ethan meant, and his heart sank into utter despair. His most trusted brother had already been torn apart and devoured by zombies. What a hopeless, crushing apocalypse this was. In that moment, tears of grievance, rage, and pain welled up in Jason's eyes and spilled over. Stop crying. I'll take you to see your brother right now, Ethan said casually, his tone indifferent. He began walking toward the two of them. With each step, the domain of the dead unfurled, its oppressive force sweeping over them like a tidal wave, erasing them almost instantly. Meanwhile, Shadow returned to his barren territory, carrying a slab of beef. But on the way back, he couldn't resist taking bites out of it. One bite turned into another, and every time he told himself, this is the last one. By the time he reached his territory, half the beef was gone, leaving only scraps and edges. Still, his ragtag group of brothers in arms was astonished. Beef. Is this real beef? Boss, where'd you get this? Did you hunt down a mutant beast? Read new chapters at Empire. No, the zombie king from the skyscraper gave it to me, Shadow replied honestly. Oh, hearing this, his men were even more shocked. The zombie king had meat but didn't eat it himself, and gave it to their boss instead. Was there really such a generous zombie in this apocalypse? Boss, I think that zombie king's not bad. Should we? I don't know, repay the favor. Shadow nodded thoughtfully, already mulling it over in his mind. Maybe it's time we settle the score with Serpent Eye once and for all. Roar. At the mention of Serpent Eye, his men let out a collective growl, their hatred palpable. Boss, I've been saying forever that we should just go to war with them. Don't rush it. We'll take our time with this, Shadow said, his mind already forming a plan. He figured he could team up with Ethan to take down Serpent Eye and finally get revenge for being driven out of his old territory. Added Nobleman at. One of his elite zombie followers spoke up. I'll follow your lead, boss. Just tell us what to do. Wait for the right moment. When the time comes, just watch for my signal, Shadow said, deep in thought. The elite zombie glanced at Shadow's face, which was as black as charcoal, and suddenly remembered how their last battle had ended in disaster, because no one could read Shadow's expressions. Elsewhere. Inside a museum, Ethan was busy collecting a few corpses. But instead of heading back to his own territory, he decided to make the most of his trip and gather more supplies. That's when he remembered the small outpost of the Blackhand Legion. Killing humans, Ethan thought, was far more entertaining than killing zombies. Humans were brimming with emotions. They could feel fear, sadness, and despair. Zombies, even the evolved ones, had emotions that were far more muted in comparison. How should he savor this delightful torment? Leaving the museum, Ethan followed the intel he'd gathered on his phone and soon arrived at a plaza. The area was eerily quiet, with no zombies in sight. Bloodstains and rotting corpses littered the ground, and the surrounding buildings were in ruins, a desolate wasteland as far as the eye could see. But Ethan could already sense it. There were humans hiding nearby. They were right beneath his feet. Instead of using the underground entrance, which was guarded by an awakener, Ethan activated his domain of the dead and slipped through the ground itself, silently infiltrating the underground mall. The world went dark for a moment before his vision returned. Ethan found himself in a spacious room. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals. Looking around, he saw wooden shelves lined with rows of transparent glass jars. Inside the jars, floating in formalin, were various preserved specimens. What the hell is this? Ethan stepped closer to take a look and realized that the jars were filled with men's severed dicks. What the? He couldn't help but curse inwardly. The Blackhand Legion really lives up to its reputation. What kind of sick hobby is this? These guys are seriously twisted. Scanning the room, Ethan counted at least 100 jars, each containing the same grotesque contents. Not a single one's big, he muttered under his breath. Just then, the sound of clinking chains reached his ears, accompanied by the faint groans of men in pain. At the far right corner of the room, two men were hanging naked, their arms and legs spread wide and bound to wooden frames with iron chains. On a nearby table lay an assortment of knives and jars. Ethan didn't need to think too hard to figure out what had happened. The two men had clearly been subjected to castration. Blood dripped from their mutilated groins, and their faces were twisted in agony. Ethan walked straight toward them. He didn't bother concealing himself. His figure materialized in full view. The two men, who had been drifting in and out of consciousness from the pain, suddenly perked up when they saw him. One of them, his voice weak and trembling, called out, "Brother, how did you get in here? Please, help us. Who's your brother?" Ethan replied casually. "Bad news for you. Your dick's already gone." The man froze, speechless. He hadn't expected to be mocked at a time like this. "Just get me out of here. Please. If that crazy woman sees you, she'll find a way to make your dick stand up, just so. She can chop it off. She's not human. She's a monster." "Well, I'm not human either," Ethan said flatly, clearly uninterested in continuing the conversation. He pulled out a dagger and plunged it into the man's neck. Blood spurted out in a violent gush, and the man's body convulsed a few times before going still. "If that crazy woman cuts off what's below, I'll just cut off what's above. Isn't that much kinder?" The other man's eyes widened in terror as he watched. "Ah. Help. Somebody help. He's killing people." But in this place, screams like that were so common that no one paid them any attention. "It's the end of the world. What's the big deal about killing someone?" Ethan said nonchalantly. With a flick of his wrist, the second man's cries were silenced. Afterward, Ethan calmly stored the two corpses in his spatial storage ring. With that done, he closed his eyes and focused on sensing the lifeforms in the underground mall. There were still over 90 humans alive in the area. Some were survivors who had been tortured to death's door, while others were members of the Blackhand Legion who were currently out on patrol. But just then, Ethan sensed someone approaching the room, a presence stronger than the others. Moments later, the door creaked open, and in walked the person the two men had referred to as the crazy woman. She had long, jet black hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. Her figure was curvaceous, with an hourglass shape that was impossible to ignore. She was dressed in a revealing outfit that left little to the imagination. The woman's eyes locked onto Ethan, and for a moment, she froze, her expression one of surprise. But that surprise quickly morphed into something else, an infatuated, almost obsessive look. "Well, aren't you a handsome one?" Since the apocalypse began, this woman, known as the crazy woman, or Demonist, by others, had never seen a man as attractive as Ethan. Not only was he strikingly handsome, but he was also clean and well-groomed, a rarity in this hellish world. To her, he was nothing short of a treasure. Where did he come from? She wondered. Did one of the guys bring him in as a gift? If so, they really know how to please me. Don't be scared, handsome, she said in a sweet, seductive voice, her eyes brimming with a dangerous allure. Her tone was soft and enchanting, carrying a hypnotic quality that could easily ensnare the weak-willed. Ethan immediately recognized her for what she was, a mental type awakener. He knew he couldn't afford to let his guard down. What do you want? He asked, his tone cold and distant. The woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she nodded slightly, her gaze growing even more sultry. Her eyes were locked onto Ethan as if she were a predator stalking her prey. She swayed her long legs as she walked toward him, her movements slow and deliberate, like a cat toying with its catch. There are places where sunlight doesn't reach, she murmured, her voice dripping with suggestion. But you could light them up. C66A sharp knife. Ethan guessed to himself that the place this woman was talking about must be inside her own head. As she approached, her seductive aura grew even stronger, her psychic energy pushed to its absolute limit. But to her surprise, Ethan remained completely unaffected. His eyes stayed as clear and calm as a still lake. What's going on? Seriously, not even a little reaction. She muttered, her tone laced with frustration. But before she could process it further, Ethan's domain of the dead unfolded in an instant, spreading rapidly and engulfing her. A crushing pressure descended like a tidal wave. The woman froze, her body stiffening as her eyes widened in shock. The flirtatious smirk she wore just moments ago twisted into sheer terror. She stammered. What's wrong? Weren't you having fun just now? Ethan's voice was calm, almost indifferent, as he raised his dagger and drove it straight toward her head. Her pupils shrank to pinpricks as realization dawned. This guy isn't human. She immediately tried to fight back with her psychic energy, but Ethan's domain of the dead was far too overwhelming. Before she could even release her power, it was forced back into her skull, compressed like a bullet misfiring in the chamber. Read New Adventures at Empire. The sensation was excruciating. A piercing scream tore from her throat as her brain felt like it was being stabbed with needles. But the scream didn't last long. Ethan's dagger flicked inside her skull, and with a swift motion, he extracted something that looked like a fresh, glistening cherry. Her lifeless body collapsed, and with a practiced efficiency, Ethan stored it away. The woman's scream was sharp and carried far, loud enough to reach the ears of two Blackhand Legion members patrolling outside. But instead of rushing to investigate, the two men just chuckled, exchanging knowing looks. Damn, sounds like she's really going wild this time, one of them said with a smirk. Yeah, she's probably having the time of her life, the other replied, grinning. Wonder whose dick she's chopping off this time. Ha, you know she doesn't just cut them off, she keeps them as trophies. The two burst into laughter, their crude banter echoing as they strolled past the door. They didn't notice when, moments later, Ethan slipped out of the room like a ghost, silent and unseen. Ethan could sense the presence of Blackhand Legion members in the rooms on either side of the hallway. In the room to the right was a small-time leader of the group, a man named Bruno Morgan. His nickname was Bear, and it fit him perfectly. He was massive, hairy, and brutish, like a grizzly. Inside, Bruno was surrounded by 4 female survivors. He was sucking on the breasts of 2 women at once, his hands groping another woman's clitoris, while his thick, oversized dick was pounding into the last woman, who was bent over in front of him. Bruno, I knew it. I knew I was your favorite. The woman he was thrusting into moaned, her face flushed with pleasure. Bullshit. Bruno loves me the most. He makes me feel so good. Another woman snapped, glaring at her. The remaining 2 women weren't having it either. They pressed their nipples against Bruno's face, shaking them aggressively. You're all just jealous. Bruno liked us first. The 4 women began bickering, their voices rising as they fought for his attention. But their jealousy wasn't born out of love. Bruno had abused and tormented them so much that they'd developed Stockholm Syndrome, their twisted affection a result of his cruelty. Ha 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 ha. Bruno roared with laughter, thoroughly enjoying the chaos. Watching the women fight over him filled him with a sick sense of satisfaction. Not long ago, the Blackhand Legion had been nothing more than a band of outlaws, hunted like rats and forced to operate in the shadows of the dark web. But now, things had changed. They were living like kings in the apocalypse, indulging in every depraved fantasy. For Bruno, the end of the world wasn't hell, it was paradise. Ethan didn't choose to attack Bruno right away. Instead, he turned and slipped into the room on the left. The moment he entered, the heavy stench of alcohol hit him like a wall. The room reeked of booze, and the sound of loud, thunderous snoring filled the air. Empty bottles were scattered all over the floor, and on the bed lay a large, overweight man, passed out cold. His snores were so loud they could have been mistaken for a chainsaw, and every exhale reeked of alcohol. He was completely out of it, sprawled across the bed like a bloated corpse. A drunk, Ethan muttered to himself, wrinkling his nose. The man was so soaked in alcohol that Ethan couldn't help but think of him as marinated meat, like bourbon-soaked ribs or whiskey-glazed steak, the kind you'd savor at a backyard barbecue. Ethan smirked at the thought. At least he's done half the work for me. Prepping himself like this. That's the kind of initiative I can appreciate. Ethan stepped forward without hesitation, effortlessly extracting the crystal core from the drunkard's body. With a flick of his hand, the corpse vanished into his spatial storage ring. In this small outpost of the Blackhand Legion, some were addicted to alcohol, while others were consumed by lust. Ethan continued walking. The room next door was where the survivors were being held. From there, he could sense the faint presence of dozens of living people. As he entered, a foul stench of urine and feces assaulted his nose. The room was a small, dimly lit warehouse, packed with dozens of humans. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow. Some leaned weakly against the walls, while others lay sprawled on the ground. The oppressive atmosphere of the sealed space was suffocating, filled with a deathly silence. But soon, a few of the captives noticed Ethan's presence. Their first reaction was to shrink back instinctively, too terrified to approach him. They saw his clean, unblemished clothes and immediately assumed he was part of the Blackhand Legion. Please. Don't kill me. Let me go, I'm begging you. I'll do anything you want, just let me out of here. Please, just a bite of food. I'm starving to death. I'll join you. I'll be cannon fodder if I have to. Long live the Blackhand Legion. Quote. A few of them dropped to their knees, men and women alike, bowing repeatedly, their minds on the verge of collapse. At. Ethan stared at them coldly for a moment before suddenly nodding. All right. The group froze, exchanging bewildered glances. They couldn't believe what they'd just heard. Did he really agree? Ethan waved his hand, and a bag of sausages appeared. There were 10 in total. This. Dozens of pairs of eyes locked onto the bag, their mouths watering uncontrollably. The overwhelming hunger gnawed at their sanity, pushing them to the brink of losing control. Although the underground mall had supplies, the Blackhand Legion never shared any with the captives. These people had been starved to their limits, surviving purely on willpower. A moment of weakness, and they'd collapse. Now, seeing the sausages, their eyes lit up with a ravenous green glow. But before anyone could move, Ethan flipped his hand again, revealing a sharp knife in his palm. Without a word, he tossed both the bag of sausages and the knife onto the ground. Ethan was curious. In such a desperate situation, would starving people choose the knife or the sausages? It was a question of human nature. At first, no one even noticed the knife. Like wild dogs, they lunged at the sausages. 3 or 5 of them, their faces twisted with desperation, tore open the packaging and stuffed the sausages into their mouths. Even as they ate, their hands kept grabbing for more, fighting off anyone who got too close. Get your hands off me, you bastard. Please, don't take it. Just give me one. Back off. It's mine. Quote. The warehouse descended into chaos. Cries, curses, and screams filled the air as dozens of people pushed and shoved, clawing their way toward the food. Ethan crossed his arms and watched, a faint sense of detachment in his gaze. For a moment, he thought there wasn't much difference between humans and zombies. One woman managed to grab a sausage and shove it into her mouth, only to have a man rip it away from her. He kicked her hard, sending her sprawling to the edge of the crowd. Some even dropped to the ground, licking up the crumbs and scraps of sausage that had fallen. There were over 50 survivors in the warehouse, but only 10 sausages. It was nowhere near enough. As the last of the sausages were being devoured by a few individuals, those on the outskirts grew increasingly desperate, yet they could do nothing. That's when a woman, standing on the edge of the chaos, turned her head and noticed something lying quietly on the ground not far away, a sharp knife. She froze for a moment, her breathing growing heavier. The cold glint of the blade reflected in her eyes, which suddenly burned with a crimson light. Die, all of you. C67 so small. The woman forced out her words through clenched teeth, her face twisted with rage. She picked up the sharp knife from the ground and lunged at the crowd, driving it into a man's neck. Blood sprayed everywhere, splattering across her face. The rush of adrenaline hit her like a drug. The suffocating confinement, the humiliation of being tormented, and all the pent-up negativity inside her erupted like a volcano in that moment. She lost all sense of reason, completely consumed by madness. Without hesitation, she began stabbing wildly at the people in front of her. The dimly lit warehouse was instantly filled with screams of agony. In mere seconds, she had taken down 5 or 6 people. One man felt a sudden chill in his abdomen, followed by a sharp, searing pain. "You bitch. You dare stab me. I'll kill you," he roared. He grabbed her wrists with both hands, wrestled the knife away from her, and, gripping the handle tightly, plunged it into her chest 4 or 5 times in quick succession. The woman let out a blood-curdling scream before collapsing into a pool of her own blood. Blood dripped steadily from the knife's tip. The man, his eyes now bloodshot with rage, turned to see someone else grabbing for the pack of sausages. "Die," he snarled. Like a rabid dog, he charged at the crowd, stabbing indiscriminately. More screams echoed through the warehouse as others fell. Realizing the man was a threat, the remaining people scrambled to wrest the knife from him. What had started as a fight over sausages had now devolved into a battle for weapons. S are rarely rational creatures. When their interests are threatened, or when they're consumed by despair and anger, they lose all sense of reason. It's as if they're possessed, with only one thought left in their minds. Kill the others. Some even began fighting each other over scraps of food, clawing at throats, gouging out eyes. The chaos spiraled into a full-blown massacre. The warehouse descended into utter madness. Screams of pain, curses, and roars of rage filled the air as one person after another fell. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, blood pooling and flowing like rivers. The air grew thick with a metallic tang, the stench of blood so strong it was suffocating. It was like a slaughterhouse. Ethan stood at a distance, his pristine white shirt untouched, watching it all unfold. Before long, fewer than 10 people were left alive in the warehouse. Most of them were gravely injured, lying on the ground, barely clinging to life. Only one man still had some strength left. Crawling through the blood, he gritted his teeth and dragged himself forward. With trembling hands, he reached for half a sausage lying on the ground. Ignoring the blood smeared all over it, he shoved it into his mouth. Ha! 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 His bloodied face twisted into a grotesque smile, his eyes narrowing in satisfaction. He looked utterly deranged, his mind shattered by everything he had just endured. Ethan decided it was time to end this farce. He began walking toward the survivors, ready to grant them release from their suffering. But the commotion inside the warehouse had drawn the attention of the patrol outside. What the hell's going on in there? Are they fighting again? Damn it. These two-legged sheep just can't behave, can they? Let them starve to death. Grumbling and cursing, the 2 patrolmen made their way toward the warehouse. However, the moment they opened the door, their expressions froze. Even the ruthless members of the Blackhand Legion couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines. The sight before them was horrifying. Over 50 bodies lay sprawled across the floor, blood soaking every inch of the ground. The air was thick with the stench of death. At Nobleman at. And amidst the carnage stood a lone figure, tall and composed, dressed in a spotless white shirt. His cold, piercing eyes locked onto theirs. The scene was utterly surreal, a vision of pure terror. What the fuck? The 2 men stared, completely petrified, their fear palpable. A wave of icy dread washed over them, sending shivers down their spines. It felt as though a tiger had wandered into their sheep pen, and they had walked in at the worst possible moment. With all the survivors now dead, Ethan's identity was no longer in question. Quick! Go find Bruno. The 2 patrolmen, realizing they were no match for him, turned to flee. But in the next instant, an overwhelming pressure descended upon them, like a mountain crashing down, pinning them in place. Their legs trembled uncontrollably, as if they were stuck in quicksand, unable to move an inch. There's no need. I'll go find him myself. Ethan's deep, magnetic voice echoed in their ears. Before they could react, their consciousness faded, and they collapsed to the ground like puppets with their strings cut. 2 more bodies joined the pile. With a casual wave of his hand, Ethan gathered up all the corpses and blood, as if tidying up a room. Then, as if taking a leisurely stroll, he made his way toward the final room. At that moment, Bruno was still in the middle of an intense session with 4 women. Bruno, I'm hungry, one of the women said coyly, her voice dripping with seduction. All right, I'll cook some pasta for you later, Bruno replied with a grin, clearly enjoying himself. But suddenly, he felt something was off. It was as if a pair of eyes were watching him. Uneasy, he instinctively glanced toward the door. What the hell? Bruno let out a startled yell. Standing in the doorway was a young man, staring directly at him. Ethan's sudden appearance had shaken Bruno to his core. His entire body froze for a moment, and his confidence faltered. When did you get in here? Bruno stammered, his voice tinged with panic. Quickly regaining his composure, he jumped out of bed, cursing loudly. Who the hell are you? A new recruit. You think you can just barge in here without saying a word? Bruno was a strength-type awakener, with weak sensory abilities. Even though chaos had erupted outside, he hadn't noticed a thing, too preoccupied with his activities. Your next chapter awaits on Empire. Ethan didn't respond. His gaze shifted downward, briefly glancing at Bruno's exposed body. Then, with a faint smirk, he said, so small. What did you just say? Bruno's eyes widened in fury, his face turning red with rage. You're dead. Even the 4 women behind him were outraged. Who is this guy? How dare he interrupt us while we're with Bruno? Exactly. And he insulted Bruno too. Doesn't he know Bruno's the boss around here? He's as good as dead. Yeah, Bruno will take care of him, and then we can get back to having fun. The women, clearly suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, had become infatuated with Bruno despite their circumstances. But before they could finish their complaints, Bruno had already charged at Ethan. His massive, muscular frame moved with the speed and ferocity of a raging bear. However, just as Bruno was about to reach Ethan, his body froze mid-stride. His legs began to tremble violently, his eyes bulging in shock. The arrogance on his face vanished, replaced by sheer terror. What's wrong, Bruno? Hurry up and teach him a lesson. Yeah, show him who's boss. Once you're done with him, we can pick up where we left off. The women's voices were filled with impatience, completely oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. But in the next moment, Bruno's trembling grew worse. Unable to withstand the crushing pressure of Ethan's domain of the dead, his knees buckled, and with a loud thud, he collapsed to the ground. Huh. The 4 women froze, their expressions filled with confusion. What was going on? Bruno was kneeling. That was their usual position, not his. Bruno, on the other hand, was overwhelmed with fear. He finally understood the sheer terror of the man standing before him. Known for his incredible physical strength, Bruno prided himself on his resilience, yet he couldn't even get close to Ethan. Raahhhh. With a desperate roar, Bruno activated his trump card. His ability allowed him to enter a berserk state, temporarily enhancing his physical strength. However, it came with a steep price, severe exhaustion that left him bedridden for an entire day after use. His muscles swelled grotesquely, veins bulging across his body like writhing snakes. Blood visibly coursed through them, giving him an almost monstrous appearance. Fueled by his berserk state, Bruno forced himself to stand within the oppressive domain of the dead. Summoning every ounce of strength, he lunged to the side, crashing through the wall to escape the room. Boom. The wall crumbled as Bruno burst into the hallway, desperate to put distance between himself and Ethan, hoping to escape the range of the domain. Bruno was no weakling. As a B+ rank awakener, he wasn't someone who could be instantly crushed by Ethan's aura alone. His neck veins bulged as he shouted frantically, help. Somebody, help me. C68 Survival of the Fittest. Stop yelling, you hillbilly. While you were busy having your fun, I already dealt with your little buddy. Ethan slowly stepped out of the room. Bruno glanced around, his eyes darting in every direction. The place was eerily empty, completely silent, not a single soul in sight. Everyone dead. A wave of pure terror washed over him. He had killed them all, silently, without a trace. Not even the bodies remained, as if they had vanished into thin air. It was beyond unsettling. It was horrifying. I'll kill you, Bruno roared, summoning every ounce of rage he had left. His massive, bear-like frame charged straight at Ethan. His movements were powerful, his momentum unstoppable, but there was a tragic futility to it, like a moth flying straight into a flame. It was the desperate charge of a warrior making his final stand. Bruno poured all his anger, fear, and despair into his fist, aiming a devastating punch at Ethan's face. Ethan, however, remained calm. With a slight tilt of his body, he effortlessly dodged the blow. Then, with a casual flick of his hand, he struck the back of Bruno's head. The move seemed almost lazy, but it was precise. In that instant, Ethan extracted Bruno's crystal core. Bruno's body went limp as he lost consciousness. His momentum carried him forward, and he collapsed to the ground, sliding nearly 20 feet before coming to a stop. His once massive, hulking form began to shrink rapidly, reverting to its original size. His body withered, deflated, and became frail, lifeless. Bruno. 4 women rushed forward from the shadows, their faces filled with grief. One of them even dropped to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Wake up. Bruno. Don't leave us. We can't live without you. Please. Please don't go. Their emotions were raw, twisted, and utterly broken. They had fallen in love with the man who had abused and tormented them, a sick, almost supernatural attachment. In another life, before the apocalypse, these women might have been students, professionals, or loving wives and mothers. They could have lived quiet, peaceful lives, raising families and growing old in comfort. But now, everything had changed. Ethan's domain of the dead expanded, enveloping the 4 women. It freed their warped souls from the chains of their unnatural obsession. Ethan felt a small sense of satisfaction. Guess I did another good deed, he thought to himself. With that, the underground mall fell completely silent. Not a single survivor remained. Ethan began wandering through the mall, casually looting supplies. There was plenty to take. Food, toiletries, and other essentials, all of which he stored in his spatial storage ring. Among the items, he found a list. It detailed the names of the Blackhand Legion members stationed at this base. There were 20 names in total, but Ethan knew he hadn't killed that many. Some of them must have been out scavenging for supplies or hunting down survivors. Ethan's mind wandered. He figured there were probably others, like Ryan, who had infiltrated official shelters and were lying low. He snapped a photo of the list and sent it to Mia. Stay tuned for updates on Empire. It didn't take long for her to reply. What's this supposed to mean? Mia asked bluntly. These are all members of the Blackhand Legion, Ethan explained. Mia didn't waste words. She simply replied, thanks. Don't mention it. Consider it a freebie, Ethan texted back. ... After gathering everything useful, Ethan returned to his territory. With a wave of his hand, he dumped out the feast he had collected. He even poured some sauce over it for good measure. A pile of corpses tumbled onto the street, forming a grotesque mountain of bodies. The smell quickly drew his subordinates, including Bulldozer, who came sniffing the air like a bloodhound. To them, the scene was like Thanksgiving dinner, turkey drenched in gravy, ready to be devoured. Holy crap. Look at all this. Boss, you're incredible. How'd you manage to catch so many? The group was in awe. Bulldozer, in particular, was stunned. The city was overrun with zombies now, and finding even a single survivor was nearly impossible. Yet somehow, Ethan had managed to bring back so many, and with such variety, too. There were barbecue ribs dripping in sauce, and Thanksgiving turkey drowned in gravy. Without hesitation, they began to feast, tearing into the bodies with ravenous hunger. The desolate street was a scene straight out of a nightmare, corpses feasting on other corpses, the sound of flesh being torn apart echoing through the air. At Nobleman at. Upstairs, Nina, a part-time worker, was cleaning the windows. Even though she'd been here for almost 2 months, the sight outside still filled her with dread, her stomach churning with nausea. And then, she noticed something. The clothes Ethan had changed out of today reeked of blood, far more than usual. It was obvious. Ethan had been killing more than ever. As night fell, darkness blanketed the city. In the pitch-black apocalypse, the growls and roars of the undead never ceased. Tonight, though, there were new, eerie sounds mixed in, unidentifiable and unsettling. No one knew what they were. Because as the apocalypse dragged on, everything, humans, zombies, mutated beasts, even plants, was evolving in unpredictable ways. At any moment, something strange and monstrous could appear. Survival of the fittest. Kill or be killed. That was the law of the apocalypse. If you wanted to live, you had to keep killing. And as time went on, the violence only escalated. Ethan soaked in the bath, changed into clean clothes, and swallowed 2 crystal cores. Then, he poured himself a glass of juice in a tall wine glass, sipping it leisurely. He stayed holed up in his spotless, orderly home, feeling a rare sense of peace. The energy from the crystal cores and blood was being absorbed into his body, making him stronger by the minute. In fact, Ethan was starting to feel like he'd surpassed the limits of the official refuge's power rankings and even the classifications set by Genesis Biotech. The strongest awakeners he'd encountered so far, like Michael from the Operation King Hunt Squad or Bruno from the Blackhand Legion, were only B+ level. But against him, they didn't stand a chance. Of course, Mia from the official refuge was an exception. If her pain threshold ever hit 100%, it was hard to imagine what she could become. Her awakening ability was a rare talent, almost like a stroke of luck. Still, even Mia had her limits. If she faced someone with an overwhelming power gap, no amount of awakening ability would save her. And besides, combat wasn't just about raw stats. There were countless other factors at play. It wasn't unheard of for the weak to defeat the strong. Take real life, for example. There were cases of rats killing cats. Or a grown man throwing a punch, twisting his ankle mid-swing, falling, and cracking his head on a rock, only to lose to a kid. So, despite Ethan's immense strength, he remained cautious. If he encountered an enemy, he'd kill them without hesitation, leaving no room for them to become a threat. At that moment, outside on the street, a shadow moved silently, blending seamlessly into the darkness. It crept closer to Ethan's territory, undetected. It was Little Shadow, the neighbor of Serpent Eye. Earlier today, while passing through Serpent Eye's territory, he'd noticed something unusual and decided to pay Ethan a visit. He also had an idea: to team up with Ethan and take Serpent Eye down. But first, he needed to figure out how strong Ethan's forces were, how many elite fighters and skilled warriors he had. He wanted to scope things out. After all, as the saying goes, know your enemy, and you'll never lose a battle. Little Shadow prowled through the darkness, moving stealthily. Before long, he heard a strange, chilling laugh. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. It was Laura. She must have eaten her fill today because she seemed to be in a good mood. Her laughter echoed through the pitch-black night, sounding far more unsettling than any cry. Damn it. Little Shadow cursed under his breath. Even as someone used to danger, he could feel an overwhelming sense of menace radiating from her, even more than from the zombies. C69 Shadow. Pretty strong. As Little Shadow kept moving forward, he grew more and more surprised. Some of the elite zombie troops were wandering around, each one radiating a powerful and ferocious aura. At one point, a zombie passed right by him, sniffing the air. It seemed to sense something unusual and almost discovered him. What a sharp nose. Little Shadow muttered to himself, feeling uneasy. If his stealth skills got exposed and Ethan's crew found out, it'd be beyond embarrassing, it'd be a total disaster. Just as he was about to move on, a voice called out from behind him. Stop right there. Huh. Little Shadow turned his head and saw a zombie with unusually clear eyes. It was obvious this one wasn't your average mindless undead, it had intelligence. In fact, it was none other than one of Ethan's 3 generals, the PhD zombie. The PhD zombie, with his awakened psychic abilities, had already locked onto Little Shadow. His sharp senses had detected the intruder. Before Little Shadow could react, a group of elite zombies came rushing over. Among them was Laura, her movements ghostly and swift, and the hulking Bulldozer, whose massive frame made him look like a walking tank. The air grew tense as the zombies surrounded Little Shadow, their killing intent palpable. He'd been caught. Little Shadow felt like he'd been slapped in the face by fate. Worse still, Ethan's zombies were undeniably strong. There was no way he could fight his way out of this. Don't panic. I'm on your side, he quickly blurted out, terrified that if he hesitated even a second, they'd tear him apart and eat him alive. Bulldozer stared at him, his curiosity piqued. Huh, where'd this big black rat come from? I'm not a rat. Little Shadow immediately dropped his shadow form, revealing his true body, jet black, like a lump of coal. My name's Shadow. You can just call me Little Shadow. Bulldozer squinted at him, still full of curiosity. Looks like a big black rat to me. The PhD zombie spoke up, his tone sharp and direct. What are you doing here? I've got something important to report to Ethan. Little Shadow explained. As soon as he said that, the surrounding zombies parted, clearing a path. Ethan appeared, his white shirt practically glowing in the darkness. What's the matter? Ethan asked, his voice calm but commanding. Boss, I found out something big today. Little Shadow exclaimed, his tone exaggerated. Genesis Biotech is sending food to Serpent Eye's territory, boxes and boxes of it. At least 10 crates, all packed with meat. As he spoke, he couldn't help but drool. It was so bad that it practically turned into a little waterfall, making his words come out garbled. Calm down first. Ethan frowned, clearly unimpressed by Little Shadow's lack of composure. Right. Little Shadow nodded furiously, wiping his mouth before continuing. And Serpent Eye's troops are gathering. They're definitely planning to make a move against you. What? They dare to go after the boss? Bulldozer roared, his anger erupting like a volcano. That slimy snake must have lost his mind. The elite zombies behind him growled in agreement, their loyalty to Ethan unwavering. To them, Ethan wasn't just a leader, he was their faith, their reason for fighting. They were ready to charge out right now and tear Serpent Eye's forces to shreds. Ethan, however, remained calm. What kind of lineup are we talking about? He asked. Serpent Eye himself, along with his two top lieutenants, Michelin and the spider zombie woman. He's got 30,000 zombies under his command, with at least 2,000 elites. Plus, he's got a whole bunch of mutant snake beasts. There's no shortage of those, that's for sure. That's quite a lot. Even Bulldozer, with his limited intelligence, could understand the situation. Ethan's territory currently had about 10,000 zombies. Thanks to Ethan's recent efforts, many had evolved, and there were now nearly 3,000 elites among them. Of those, 500 were part of the X-Virus Enhanced Elite Corps. But in terms of sheer numbers, they were still outmatched. Serpent Eye is working with Genesis Biotech. When the time comes, Genesis Biotech will definitely step in, and their strength isn't something to scoff at. Plus, Little Shadow paused for dramatic effect before continuing, Serpent Eye has evolved into an A-rank zombie king. He's awakened the ability Phantom Realm. It's creepy, powerful, and downright terrifying. Enjoy more content from Empire. Bulldozer snorted, clearly unimpressed. How strong can he really be? Why are you hyping him up like this? I'm not hyping him up. I'm just telling the truth, because I've fought him before. Bulldozer froze, momentarily speechless at Little Shadow's blunt honesty. If this guy was admitting he got his butt kicked, then Serpent Eye must really be a tough opponent. The zombies around them exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just any enemy, they were dealing with someone 2 levels stronger than the red-faced zombie king they'd fought before. All eyes turned to Ethan, waiting for his decision. No matter what he said, they were ready to follow him, even if it meant charging into hell itself. Ethan stood silent for a moment, deep in thought. Then, his voice cut through the tension like a blade. Tomorrow, we'll wipe them out. Roar. The zombies erupted in a deafening cheer, their bloodlust ignited. Laura's lips curled into a grin so wide it nearly reached her ears, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs. She thought to herself, that's our boss. His decisions never disappoint. The territory had been too quiet for too long. A good, bloody battle was exactly what they needed. Bulldozer, too, was fired up. He felt a personal stake in this fight. After all, the grudge with Serpent Eye had started because of him. Tomorrow, we'll crush them. Little Shadow glanced around at the zombies, their fighting spirit burning like wildfire. He couldn't help but feel a pang of awe. Ethan's crew was far stronger than he'd imagined. Tomorrow's battle was going to be brutal. After the decision was made, the zombies dispersed to prepare. Through some quick negotiations, Little Shadow agreed to bring his 5,000 subordinates, including 1,000 elites, to join the fight. Serpent Eye will never see this coming, Little Shadow thought with a smirk. He's in for a nasty surprise. But Ethan wasn't done yet. He had another surprise in mind. Back in his room, he sat on the couch and sent a message to Mia. I've got a huge opportunity for you. Mia's reply came quickly. Oh, what kind of opportunity? Tomorrow, you can come kill zombies. There was a long pause. Ethan stared at his phone, waiting for a response. Mia, on the other hand, was sitting there, completely dumbfounded. Kill zombies. That's your idea of a huge opportunity. At Nobleman at. In this world, zombies were everywhere. They weren't exactly a rare commodity. Before she could reply, Ethan sent another message. We're hunting an A-rank zombie king tomorrow, Serpent Eye. You can raid his territory for supplies while we're at it. That caught Mia's attention. She knew about Serpent Eye. His territory was rumored to hold valuable resources. A while back, a small team had discovered a stash of preserved crop seeds there. But before they could retrieve them, Serpent Eye's forces wiped them out. No one had dared to try again since. Crop seeds were a rare and precious resource for humans. That could work, Mia replied, explaining her interest in the seeds. Ethan had no objections. Go ahead. Bring your team and take whatever you need. If anything happens, I'll step in. With that, the two finalized their plan. Ethan put his phone away and stood by the window. It was already past midnight, the darkest hour of the night. Outside, the endless growls and roars of zombies echoed through the streets, a constant reminder of the world they lived in. The next day, thick clouds blanketed the sky, blocking out the sun. The air was heavy and gray. No wind, no rain, no light. Caw, caw, caw. A few black crows screeched. As they darted across the sky, their shadows flitting over the desolate streets below. On the ground, chaos reigned. Broken buildings and debris littered the streets, a grim reminder of the world's collapse. At the edge of Ethan's territory, a massive force had gathered. Ethan stood at the front, flanked by his 3 trusted generals. Behind them stretched a horde of 10,000 zombies, packed so tightly together that they seemed to stretch on forever. Their grotesque faces radiated bloodlust, their excitement palpable. This was Ethan's army. They had marched to the border of Serpent Eye's territory. Just a short distance ahead lay the enemy's domain. The zombies waited, tense and ready, for Ethan's command. One word from him, and they would charge forward, tearing through Serpent Eye's forces like a tidal wave of death. But Ethan raised a hand, signaling them to hold. Stay here. I'll go ahead and take a look first. C-70 Rainstorm of serpents. Ethan took a few steps forward, his figure gradually fading until he completely disappeared. He had entered stealth mode and stepped into the territory of the Serpent Eye Zombie King. His main goal was to scout the area. Besides, Mia hadn't arrived yet, and he had no idea where she was. He figured he'd have to drag her into doing something productive once she showed up. The buildings on either side of the street were in ruins, crumbling and desolate. Dried bloodstains and decayed skeletons littered the ground, while a few zombies shuffled aimlessly, their stiff movements devoid of purpose. These zombies were the weakest of the weak, old, sick, and falling apart. Their bodies were severely decomposed, reeking of rot, with maggots wriggling in their flesh. They were disgusting to look at, the kind of creatures that could make anyone gag. Their combat ability posed a threat only to ordinary humans, they were little more than walking corpses. Of course, there was one exception, a slightly evolved zombie. It sat by the side of the street, clutching a large rat in its hands, gnawing on it with blood dripping from its mouth. Its face was smeared with gore, and rat fur clung to its lips. Further ahead, near the base of a crumbling wall, lay a corpse. Several small snakes slithered in and out of its rotting flesh, turning the body into their personal playground. Disgusting, Ethan muttered, wrinkling his nose. He found the Serpent Eye Zombie King's territory to be utterly unsanitary. It was filthy, like a pigsty. To make matters worse, between the buildings, countless spiderwebs hung in the air. They were thick with trapped insects, and even a few mutated sparrows were caught in the sticky threads. The birds struggled desperately, causing the webs to tremble, but they couldn't break free. The overlapping webs formed a dense, chaotic mess. Just looking at them was enough to trigger anyone's fear of clusters or tight spaces. Ethan ignored the mess and casually pulled out his phone to text Mia. Where are you? Farmer's market. You. Almost there. Alright, we'll talk when we meet. I'm busy right now. Mia sent the reply with one hand while slicing through a zombie with her other. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and kept moving. Around her were more than a dozen people, all engaged in combat with zombies. Among them were her partner, Sean, and Chris's group from last time. They were here to help transport supplies. Sean glanced at Mia with admiration in his eyes. You can text with one hand while fighting zombies. That's impressive. It's just practice, Mia replied casually. She gripped her blade with both hands and decapitated another zombie in one swift motion. Sean nodded thoughtfully, as if her words had struck a chord. It reminded him of his years of driving. He'd never really paid attention to how the wheels turned, yet he could reverse into a parking spot with pinpoint accuracy every time. Why? Because practice made perfect. He also recalled something his school coach used to say. With enough effort, water can carve through stone, and a rope can saw through wood. Keep practicing, and even the hardest tasks will become second nature. Yeah, practice really was the key. Behind them, Chris and his group wielded alloy blades, cutting down zombies with ease. These were low-level zombies, the kind that could be dealt with in just a few strikes. There wasn't much pressure, it was more like routine cleanup. They were clearing the area of zombies to make it easier to transport supplies later. Nearby stood the farmer's market. Its rolling shutter door was half open, smeared with bloodstains. The marks of human fingernails clawing at the metal were still faintly visible. The door was rusted shut. Mia stepped forward, gripping her blade with both hands. With a single swing, there was a sharp swish. The door was sliced cleanly in two, as if it were warm butter under a hot knife. Mia, as the first ever Awakener 001, wielded a custom-made weapon, a tachi. The blade and hilt were both unusually long, nearly matching her height. Embedded in the hilt was a lightning element crystal core, faintly crackling with electricity. When fully activated, the electric energy would envelop the sleek blade, enhancing both its speed and destructive power. This was the latest tech developed by the Shelter, Crystal Core Armaments. At the moment, Mia's weapon was one of a kind, and it looked awesome. I mean, who could say no to a glowing sword? With the long blade resting casually on her shoulder, Mia strode straight into the farmer's market. The place was dimly lit, the air thick with the stench of rot. From the darker corners, faint zombie growls echoed ominously. Behind her, Chris rummaged through his backpack, pulling out a grenade. He lobbed it forward with a strong throw. This wasn't just any grenade, it had a flashing red light. After rolling a couple of times on the ground, it started emitting a sharp, rhythmic beeping. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was piercing, cutting through the silence and spreading across the entire market. Rog. The zombies, drawn by the noise, began shambling toward the grenade en masse. As the red light on the grenade blinked faster and the beeping grew more frantic, the tension in the air spiked. Beep, 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 beep. Boom. The explosion erupted with a deafening roar, a burst of blinding fire swallowing the horde of zombies. Chunks of flesh and shattered limbs rained down, accompanied by rising smoke and the acrid stench of charred meat. Hey, problem solved, Chris said smugly. The Shelter had been developing all kinds of anti-zombie weapons lately, and they were proving to be pretty effective. Though, for now, they only worked on low-level zombies. With the immediate threat cleared, the group headed straight for the seed storage warehouse. The journey was surprisingly smooth. It seemed the grenade had done its job. They didn't encounter any more zombies along the way. Before long, they reached a room. Even in the dim light, they could make out stacks of large crates piled up ahead. We hit the jackpot. Let's see if there's anything good in here, one of the younger guys said, his face lighting up with excitement. He rushed forward, eager to check out the supplies. Grabbing the lid of one of the crates, he yanked it open with a flourish. But instead of seeds, he was met with a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at him. A snake. Its sharp fangs glistened as it flicked its tongue, hissing menacingly. For a moment, the two locked eyes. Oh, crap. The young man's face went pale as he realized what he was looking at. He tried to back away, but it was too late. Whoosh. The snake lunged, sinking its fangs into his neck. The sharp, searing pain made him cry out in agony. The others froze, equally horrified. A snake. Mia reacted instantly. With a swift motion, she swung her blade straight at the snake's head. The razor-sharp edge sliced through the air with precision, so close to the young man's skin that it shaved the fine hairs on his neck. The snake's head was severed cleanly, its body dropping lifelessly to the ground. The young man stumbled back, clutching his neck. His face was pale, his breath ragged. He looked like he'd just brushed shoulders with death itself. But the burning pain in his neck brought him back to reality. When he pulled his hand away, it was smeared with dark, blackened blood. It's venomous. Of course it's dangerous. The last search team that came here was wiped out. Stay alert, Chris warned, his voice tense. As if on cue, a faint rustling sound began to spread through the warehouse. From beneath the crates and through the cracks, countless black snakes began slithering out, surrounding the group. There's something primal about the human fear of snakes, something buried deep in our DNA. Continue reading stories on Empire. Seeing the writhing mass of serpents, everyone felt their skin crawl. Kill them. As a few snakes slithered closer, Mia didn't hesitate. She swung her blade, slicing them cleanly in half. The others quickly grabbed their weapons, joining the fight against the swarm. But then, a new sound came from above, a faint, unsettling squirming. Chris glanced up and froze in terror. The ceiling beams were covered in snakes. Dozens, maybe hundreds, coiled together in writhing masses. And now, they were starting to drop. It was like a rainstorm of snakes, falling straight toward them.